Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. Today, we are now in part 3 of our interview with Liz Lambson. I am joined by my partner in truth and righteousness, Margie DeLynn. Hey, Margie.
Hey, Fabe.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, my pleasure.
For those who didn't watch parts 1 and 2, we've had an amazing series so far with Liz. As we were talking to Liz about the themes, I just want to kind of give a quick recap. Liz was born, if I'm remembering right, and Liz will correct me, she was born to an African-American father from Louisiana and a South Korean
Correct.
mother, kind of a biracial, interracial marriage, raised vaguely Catholic, but not super religious. And in part 1, Liz kind of advanced kind of 3 themes for part 1, which were abandonment, adolescence, and atonement. It talks about how Liz's mother abandoned or left the family when Liz was around 10 years old.
Yeah.
And how that was very difficult for her and for the family. How she made some friends who were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the LDS Church, and became what I think she called a dry Mormon all throughout her high school years, growing up in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And how, in her adolescent years, she found her way, but the Mormon Church was a very important part of her adolescence, even though her father would not allow her to get baptized. Right. And there were also some themes around dating and sexual purity or modesty culture, law of chastity kind of stuff. Anyway, it's a really important part 1. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2 yet, please pause, go back and watch them, and that will provide the groundwork for parts 3 and 4, which we're covering today. So that's part 1. And then part 2, Liz actually ends up going to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah as a non-Mormon. She's there on a music scholarship where she played the bass, the stand-up bass for BYU's most elite orchestra, toured the world with BYU, and started, trying to date, and got baptized at BYU. So the themes that she advanced for part 2 were BYU baptism and boyfriends. And again, really important episode. Please go watch that. And it culminates in Liz sort of realizing that she actually enjoyed Mormonism more when she was not an official member, because once she started experiencing the worthiness interviews and the pressure around the honor code and perfectionism, that it became unhealthy for her. Yeah. And it kind of culminated in a pretty dramatic point where she's kind of nearing the end of her time at BYU, contemplating whether she wanted to just become an artist full-time, performing artist full-time, or sort of like really commit to the traditional Mormon woman way. And I, we kind of ended part 2 with her saying, I think I'm a little bit afraid of doing the full-time artist thing, even though I have doubts about the church. And maybe I think I'm going to commit to the Mormon way. Yes. Which brings us to part 3. Yes. And one of the most amazing things about this series is Liz has a different outfit for each of the parts.
Let's appreciate.
And so, Liz, welcome back to Mormon Stories.
Thank you.
For part 3.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
And tell us about your outfit for. You could, if you want to describe your outfits for parts 1 and 2, just as a recap, because I didn't mention your outfits, and then you can tell us what this outfit is.
Yeah, let's see. So for part 1, my childhood in the 90s, I wore just a nice, really bright 90s windbreaker, zipper jacket, and a velvet choker. Nod to the 90s. Episode 2, I wore a BYU Cougar blue corset, representing the sort of restraining one's sexuality in that environment, and over a very churchy floral yellow blouse that one could wear to church. So just these competing themes through in what I was wearing. Today, as we enter into the married years, I am wearing a classic Relief Society cardigan. You can't see it, but I have a nice muted brown, well beyond the knee length skirt.
Garment fully covering the garment.
And I have brought a message about this cardigan from Relief Society Sister Liz.
Now, is this a sweater you actually wore?
No,
Okay.
it's new.
It's symbolic.
Yeah.
I love it. That's even better. It's artistic. Okay.
So if you don't mind, I have prepared a 2-minute talk
Please.
about the cardigan, which I will share in my best Relief Society sister voice.
Okay.
As if this were women's conference or something.
Oh, brilliant.
Okay, welcome to Women's Conference. My dear Relief Society sisters, how grateful I am for each of you. Today, I would like to bear my testimony of the importance of our clothing and what our clothing communicates. Specifically, I have chosen to speak today about the cardigan of the Holy Priesthood. I know many of you have felt the warm, protective, powerful influence of the cardigan in your lives. The cardigan has sheltered our shoulders from the carnivorous gaze of predatory, sex-hungry men with very active loins. Since Sister Coco Chanel introduced this modern post-polygamy era staple in the early 1920s. The cardigan has shielded the white fabric of our garments from curious Gentile stares. It has allowed us to wear otherwise slutty, sleeveless dresses, miraculously made modest, in combination with down east layering shirts to hide our sacred breasts. But as good as the cardigan is, dear sisters, I feel strongly that it is time to step up our game. To quote my favorite patriarchal leader, President Dallin H. Oaks, we have to forego some good things in order to choose others that are better or best. Dear sisters, the golden beads accentuating the knit collars of the cardigan I wear today are not enough. It is time for us to do better, be better, and wear better. Sisters, even if it means removing your favorite set of well-washed Caranessa garments, I stand before you today to share counsel I have received from the Lord, that it is time to dress in a way that reflects who you truly are, in a way that makes you feel comfortable, beautiful, and authentic. I know the restoration of your wardrobe to reflect the fullness of your identity will be difficult, perhaps even frightening at times. But I testify that as you embrace the full potential of your divine nature and dress in a way that makes you shine instead of shrivel into a dusty prune shrinking behind the shadow of your husbands, you will find greater joy, greater peace, greater confidence, and more exciting intimate relationships as you embark on a journey to accept the sexual body with which you have been endowed by God. Now, to follow the counsel of Elder Ballard to the women of the church, I will refrain from talking too much. After straightening you all out quickly, let us move the work on. Sisters, I love you. I want the best for you. I share this with you in the name of the cardigan, the camisole, and the holy brassiere. Amen. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you for listening to my talk about the cardigan.
That's a spicy way to begin.
I love it.
Well,
Wow.
So, with these costume changes, I make the point that what we wear affects how we feel. What we wear communicates something. Often you look at people's fashion choices and you think, hey, that's an outward expression of their inward personality. But there's the flip side where what you wear on the outside can affect how you feel inwardly. And thinking of garments, Mormon garments, that's a great example of how what you wear on the outside affects how you feel on the inside. And I think, reflecting on wearing garments underneath these layers, to me, made me feel the feeling of submissiveness or submission, wearing. And I wonder if it's different for men when they wear the garments of the holy priesthood, if that makes them feel or reminds them of the power that they hold, perhaps the garments of the priesthood that I hold. Whereas for women, you wear the garments of the holy priesthood, and that is recognizing the priesthood power, the priesthood direction that you have committed to follow. You're going to be obedient, you're going to be respectful, you're going to listen to what the priesthood holders tell you to do. So anyway, what you wear affects how you feel, and it also communicates to others how it goes both ways. Inward to outward, outward to inward. Clothing is important.
Totally. Yeah. And, we refer a lot back to Stephen Hassan's work on high demand religions and or cults, the bite model. And the B in the bite model represents behavior. And one of the key patterns or tools that are used in high demand religions is the control of things like food, drink, sex, and clothing. Clothing is a really important, whether it's ultra Orthodox Judaism, evangelical Christianity, Islam, or Mormonism. Clothing is an essential part of the conditioning and of the identity that these traditions need us to conform to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. This is the word conformity. We're going to come back to that.
Really quickly, what I also wanted to make sure we mentioned before we began is just, again, to reintroduce kind of your world outside of this interview. So Liz Lambson is a Korean African-American artist, musician, and writer. Along with her spouse, Sam, is a parent to 5 boys residing in Salt Lake City. Liz performs as a string bassist with the Ballet West Orchestra, as well as the children's singer-songwriter Lizzie Luna, the creator of the music and movement program Yoga Storytime and Songs. Liz performed for and toured with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and Orchestra at Temple Square, which we'll be talking about, I think, in this episode.
Yeah.
Just to know a little bit about what that's like. For several years, she released her first album of original children's yoga music, Reach to the Sky, in 2018. Her writing has been featured in publications including The New Era and The New York Times. I think we talked about your New Era article in part 2.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, and she's an active member of Utah's arts and culture community. She formerly served as the executive director of the Utah Black History Museum. Her artwork is featured on Salt Lake City's Black Lives Matter mural at City Hall. And you're an aspiring film actress. Okay.
Yeah.
We're ready.
So many things.
So let's launch into part 3.
Let's do it.
Where do you want to begin?
Oh. Well, I think we left off with that moment of decision. Margie, you mentioned seeing things through a lens. Moment of decision, looking through a lens at my future. Do I choose to stay in the church and get married and be the Mormon housewife that I aspired to be when I joined? Or do I go and be an artist, hit the road, be free? So I was my last year at BYU, my second senior year, my 5th year. And that fall, I went to my neighbor's apartment to hang out, and I saw a young man in the room sitting on the couch. And when I entered the room, he said, "Hey, you're Liz you're Liz Rhodes. We met on this BYU orchestra tour. You were on tour in Rome. I was on my mission there, and your bus got lost. And do you remember me?" And I didn't. But, thinking back, like, okay, yeah, our bus got lost. There was someone who got on the bus. But he didn't look like a missionary anymore. He was a little more longer hair, a little more scraggly. But this was who would become my husband, Sam. And we became friends. We started dating. And in true BYU fashion, the topic of marriage came up within 2 months. That was the trend with my 2 previous boyfriends: date for 2 months and marriage is on the table. But what was different with Sam, what was interesting, is that we didn't talk about marriage before he proposed. So we dated for 2 months, and then he absolutely surprised me with a very sincere, genuine proposal, in the sense that he proposed the idea of what our life could look like together. And then I just had a moment to think about it and respond. So, because I think a lot of couples nowadays, and even within Mormonism, you talk about getting married, you go and you pick out a ring, you discuss it. But he really popped the question in a very surprising way, it caught me off guard. Thankfully, he proposed with a fake ring, which was the opposite of what I would have chosen for myself. But he gave me the opportunity after the fact to pick what I wanted. And he proposed in New York City. I was there visiting my sister, and there were kind of 2 proposals, one with the fake ring, and then we got the ring that I wanted, and we went ice skating at Rockefeller Center, and New Year's Day, and he pulled me to the center of the ice rink and got down on one knee, and big show. And I was really just overwhelmed in so many ways. Yeah. But part of why he proposed so quickly is that graduation was coming up. Like, my last semester of BYU was beginning following that New Year's, and he had 1 more year left for his master's, and he had an internship lined up that summer in California. And he was really worried that if he went on his internship, if he went away without me, that our relationship would dissolve.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
What type of Mormon was Sam? Was he an Orthodox, strict, conservative, uptight Mormon? Was he liberal, progressive Mormon? Where did he fit? Describe his Mormonism if you can.
Yeah, I would say closer to the latter. Something that I really appreciated about Sam was that he was more chill. He was not into all the strict Orthodox rules. When I had been dating Stan, I remember an experience at the grocery store where I was reaching for a box of herbal tea, and Stan was like, better safe than sorry. Better not drink that herbal tea. It's best to just stay away from all of that. Whereas Sam was not that way at all. And he came from he was, the middle of 5 siblings. 2 of those weren't active in the church at the time. And this was a big thing. He had gone to high school in Hong Kong. His family lived there. They were expats. So he'd gone to an international school, Hong Kong International School, and had been exposed to the ways of the world. When those adolescent years for him were in an environment that was really freeing and opened his mind to a lot of things he wouldn't have been exposed to had he done high school in Gilbert, Arizona, where he was growing up. Although he did return back there for his senior year. So there is a theme I noticed with all the 3 serious boyfriends that I had at BYU, is that each one of them had some experience or exposure to a foreign culture. So, the first boyfriend I mentioned, he didn't date me until he served in Hawaii with brown Polynesian people, and I always suspected that opened his mind to feeling comfortable with me as a brown person.
But maybe exoticized a little bit,
Perhaps.
possibly.
And then the second boyfriend, he had served his mission in Japan, and so he really appreciated my Asian culture, my Asian side. And after we broke up, he started dating another half Asian young woman, and they got married within months, like very quickly. So he knew what he wanted. He knew what he liked. And then Sam too, had spent a very important part of his youth in Asia. And so he also appreciated my ethnic background. We could connect in terms of how much we had traveled the world, and our love for Asian culture and Asian things. And he was, had that international attitude that was very accepting of me. So that was important.
May I ask a tiny bit about that?
Yeah.
What's it like to have someone value you in part because of your ethnicity? In other words, on the one hand, it's horrific to have someone not like you because of your ethnicity. So you wouldn't want that.
It's like, yeah.
At the same time, I could imagine you wouldn't want to be exoticized or objectified because in some sense you don't choose your ethnicity.
Right.
On the other hand, you want to be loved and valued for who
Right.
you are. So what is there anything you would want to share about?
And there might be a sense of feeling more seen sometimes if
Yeah.
someone has actually spent time in a culture that you relate to, come
Yeah.
from, and is part of your identity. So is it complicated?
Oh, it's so complicated. Absolutely. I mean, you nailed it. It's like, I think I'd mentioned in a previous episode how like the kind of hypochondriac attitude where like, oh, if something's wrong with me, someone will notice me or take pity on me. Like if I had a broken arm and someone wants to sign my cast. And so there is, when you're different, that makes you stand out, sometimes in good ways and sometimes in bad ways. And so it was preferable to me to be noticed in a positive way for my ethnic differences. But I mean, people would make comments like if I wrapped my hair in a scarf and wore it to school, people would call me Aunt Jemima, like these little kind of microaggressive things. But at the same time, other people, maybe without saying that I looked like a kitchen servant, would say that the scarf was really cool. And so it was hard to interpret people's reactions to just who I was. It still is, I think. I mean, I've come to really embrace all the things that make me unique, whether it's my racial background or the nature of my mental health. We talked about that a bit. The way my brain works, the things that make me different, I have come to love and see them as good things. I try to see them as blessings, whereas you can easily see these things as curses as well. So how I see myself, has become much more positive in terms of me seeing these things as blessings, but I can't change how other people might view it if they see me more as cursed.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I ask a question about Sam?
Please.
Yeah.
So you've brought up one way that Sam may have stood out from, other people you've dated, or are there other things that come to mind when you think about your experience dating Sam that made him different?
Yeah. I mean, someone asked me recently what my favorite thing about him is. He's really, really funny. Like, he's so funny. His sense of humor, his wit, he's so sharp. He's so fast. And so he put me at ease. He helped me relax. Being with him, in that environment that was so uptight, where the BYU or the church in general is not a comfortable place for perfectionists. And so he wasn't concerned with all the little things. He was more of a big picture person, and so he was really just down to earth, intelligent, again, funny. And I think what was apparent right away is that we just could talk to each other endlessly. And I did feel comfortable talking with other people that I dated, but not in the same way. Like Sam and I mean, not to boast about myself, but like we're kind of more intellectual. We could get into, really meaty, deep conversations about anything and everything. And so I thought, this is someone that I could talk to indefinitely. I will never get bored with this person. That's true.
I love that. One other follow-up question. One of the things I didn't mention in the introduction for today of the recap of the past episodes was how interwoven your affections for Stan were in your, adolescence and early adulthood, and how you wanted to marry Stan. Yeah. He went on his mission. You waited for Stan. He came. He came home, and you even dated him for a while. And then that being so central to your conversion and commitment to the church, and then it didn't work out.
Yeah.
How did you process or experience things not working out with Stan, and then Sam as an alternative or as something different? Was that disappointing? Was it actually exciting? Like, how did you experience Stan not working out? It was Stan, right?
Yeah, it was Stan. Yeah. I think, as I was saying, like, well, it's true that when things didn't work out with Stan, it was like, this is what I've been working towards. I followed him here, and so it did feel like the whole world fell apart. And there, I had that conversation with him where he was like, there are other fish in the sea, Liz. And I was like, no, but none like you, Stan. And that's true. There were no other Stans. But meeting Sam, though, was like this perfect middle ground to that, where I felt like, okay, my choices are to leave the church and be myself, or to be the Mormon wife. And it seemed like maybe there's a way with Sam that I could be both. He's relaxed enough that I think that he will genuinely accept the artistic, free bird qualities that I have, while still providing me with the stability and framework of the safe Mormon home life. So his degree made a difference. He was studying information systems. He chose that degree instead of political science or Italian humanities, these things that he's also passionate about. But he chose that degree because it was, at the time anyway, you could make the most money right out of BYU with that specific degree. So he was very motivated to become a very stable provider. And I was also looking for that because I was afraid of graduating and living in a box with my guitar. That was a scary idea. So, and then I also had these mental health issues. And so I knew I needed health care. Right? And so I knew that with Sam, he would take care of me. And this was part of his proposal, part of what he explained to me when he asked me to marry him. He said he would always support me as an artist and a musician and a writer. He, financially or otherwise, he did not want to squash those parts of me, and that he would always be there to help me do the things that make me who I am. And he's stayed true to that promise, which is magnificent. I couldn't ask for more from a partner.
That's so meaningful.
Yeah.
So he was internationally experienced enough, open-minded enough, progressive Mormon enough to not try and jam you into the super rigid Relief Society, full-time mom, Mormon ideal.
Although we still both held on to that ideal. He'd gone on his mission and he came back. This is hilarious to me. He came back from his mission with that missionary attitude, like, okay, if you approach gathering converts to the church in this numerical way, make so many contacts per day, give away this many Book of Mormons, extend this many invitations, and that will equate to this number of converts. He came to BYU after his mission with that approach with dating. So he was like, if I get this many phone numbers and I go on this many dates, I will be able to find my eternal companion if I approach it in this way. So he had like a little book, kind of like what the missionaries have, where he would keep track of his dates.
Wow.
The phone numbers, he had to get so many phone numbers per week. So when he'd get on the bus at school, he'd try to get a girl's number. And it started getting confusing because he'd have a first date with someone, and then the second date was so-and-so, and just had to kind of balance this. It was a game.
It'd be like, how do you compare a second date to a first date?
But over time, he realized that it wasn't working. He wasn't even making friends with these people. It was so shallow. And so he remained single till, the ripe old age of 24.
That's when I married Margie at 24.
Which at BYU, people as they approach graduation, and I felt this too, like there's this pressure, like if you don't find your eternal spouse or your eternal companion before you graduate from BYU, you have failed and you will have a very difficult time finding someone outside of this place. So I think both of us felt that sense of urgency. Like I was nearing my graduation. This was sort of my last chance to find that Mormon man to marry, and he was an excellent choice. So
it seems like in the husband department or in the spouse partner department, you kind of hit the jackpot from what I am hearing so far.
Sam's a really good guy. I feel like he's. Gosh, I say it to him sometimes. He hates it when I say this, but I feel like he could do better. Like,
I don't know about that.
I know
we're gonna give you a
argue,
little pushback
he'll
on
argue
that,
but I think.
But you talked about. I think you said this off screen. I asked you, and we don't want to jump to the end, but we asked you whether, there's a part of you that wishes you had just left BYU, left the church, and become an artist. In your early 20s. And your response was pretty profound to me. I don't know if you want to share that now or later.
Yeah, my mental health was in such a poor state that I really was afraid that if I went out on my own, I wouldn't survive. I imagined myself spiraling out and taking my own life because that's something that I would settle into and want to do many times. And so that was always something to think about. I needed someone to protect me or keep me safe. Like there was a time, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, there was a couple months where I lived in an apartment by myself at BYU, and my therapist at the time was like, you cannot be alone. If you need to go stay with somebody else, stay with a friend, we got to find you a roommate, something, but you can't be alone. This isn't safe for you. And so I thought, being married, having someone to kind of take care of me would be useful for my own survival.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, when we got married, that turned into one of, if not the worst summer of my life. Sam took me on that internship, and we were in a 1-bedroom apartment, and he'd go to work, and I was just alone, like in this box. And I remember a friend telling me that just some advice from her dad, like keep major life changes down to 1 per year ish. But when I got married, it was, we got married the day after I graduated, like literally the day after. Graduation was on Friday, got married on Saturday. And then we had our honeymoon. We moved to California for his internship. I left my job. I left my friends. I left everything that was familiar to me. I left my therapist. I left my doctors, everything. All of that happened in the span of 1 week. And then you throw in, having like losing your virginity and all these like first sexual, like intense sexual experiences. That's also really huge. So, I really struggled that summer being, I'd spend so many hours alone in this apartment without a car, and I was miserable.
Is there anything you want to talk about the wedding or your first temple?
Oh yeah,
experience? Or anything else about your courtship, like law of does law of chastity, bishop worthiness interviews
totally
figure in any of this? I don't want to jump over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We had talked about. We talked about that M word in the previous episodes, that terrible habit, the masturbation habit. And I was so, I don't know, I felt this need to confess, like, when would I learn that, like, it was better to just keep some things to yourself, Like I had said earlier, like before introducing the worthiness interview and the accountability to a priesthood holder after my baptism, before then I could just work this out between me and God and feel fine and go through a very simple and straightforward repentance process and find peace. But when you throw in that middleman, literally a man, it gets more complicated and messy. And so I admitted to this heinous act to my bishop while I was dating Sam. And again, it led to me losing my temple recommend while we were engaged. So we're approaching our wedding date. It's already scheduled. It's planned. The date's set at the Salt Lake Temple. And there was this like, oh my gosh, but am I going to be temple worthy in time? Can I get through the repentance process in time so that we can get married? And how embarrassing would that be to like cancel our temple sealing and people would be like, oh, what happened? Why? Is she pregnant? It's like, no, she just touched herself. Like how embarrassing would that be?
Because people would know that you did something.
I did something.
And they would be likely to assume the worst.
Yeah. And so there was that going on as well, these meetings with my bishop at the time.
So you basically said, I'm taking your temple recommend away?
Well, it was a little more complex with him in the sense that he was like, do you feel worthy? And I'd been so conditioned by that point to think, no, I'm not worthy. I'm a horrible person. I'm on the level of an adulteress, as my previous bishop had established with me. For
masturbation.
Yeah, because that's having sex with yourself, which is on the same level as adultery. I think in a lot of Mormon culture, it seems like having an orgasm equals sex. So if you experience that, then you've committed the great sin. The ultimate pleasure is the ultimate sin. And that is not something that once you get married, that conditioning doesn't go away. So
what was it like to have that experience with your bishop right before your marriage?
Oh,
What was
so
it like for you?
so stressful. It was similar to the feeling like there was a class that, a general ed class that I'd put off to my last semester. And there was the option to take the class, attend class, and get take your grade from the class, or you could take your grade on the final. So I chose to not attend the class the entire semester and planned to just take the final and pass the class. So it was literally the week before our marriage, the week before graduation and our wedding, where I was reading this entire science textbook,
Wow.
hoping that I would pass it so that I could graduate. And I did. I got a C. But that feeling of like, oh my gosh, am I going to pass? Am I going to pass so I can graduate? Was exactly the feeling I had working with my bishop. Oh my gosh, am I going to get through the repentance process? Am I going to pass? Am I going to be able to have that card so that I can get married the day after graduation? Is it going to work out? And meanwhile, we're putting the whole wedding together, and
So stressful.
oh, super stressful just to have that one element hanging over my head. And but again, there's just this crazy double standard where I know my husband was doing the same thing, but the boys don't get any consequences. And they also, I think it's just sort of like boys will be boys. They don't feel a need to confess because they've done nothing wrong. Like it's not a big deal. But for women who really embrace the standards of what it takes to be a virtuous, worthy woman, any kind of sexual activity or experience or feeling, even just feeling that way, can make you feel like a terrible fallen person. So, and it was so hard to, we were taking like a marriage prep class, and they would talk about, they recommended this book. I brought it, and They Were Not Ashamed.
Brotherson?
Oh.
Yeah.
Brotherson?
Yeah, like just preparing you, like, okay, I know you feel ashamed now, but you'll get married and then you need to overcome that feeling of shame. But that's not something that happens instantly. I don't think it's ever gone away for me.
So to talk about, obviously you get married and you become sexually active. How does the Mormon conditioning extend into your marriage in a not helpful way?
Yeah, I mean,
just to put words to it.
I think I'm still like this. Like I can have a really amazing sexual experience and then just still feel kind of bad or yucky about it after, or just feel yucky.
Yeah.
It's a huge bummer. I'm still working on that.
Wait, so how many years into your marriage?
Almost 15.
So you're saying 15 years into your marriage, the conditioning, the negative conditioning and associations around sexuality that you received in the Mormon church make it so that 15 years into your marriage, you still feel guilt or shame or yuckiness when you experience sexual pleasure?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a pretty intense cultural programming.
It is. And I mean, what's your take on that? I don't feel like that's unusual.
I don't think so. And I don't think it's specific to Mormonism. I think it's
there are layers.
just expectations for women. I mean, it applies to so many things. Like, if I work even part-time, I can feel icky and yucky about that, because it's not what women should do, ? Yeah. That feeling applies to a lot of things. I wanted to mention this experience I had when we were shopping for wedding dresses, and this goes back to kind of the clothing thing, but there was my sister-in-law ended up making my wedding dress. She's a fashion designer and very talented. And she was the one who was not actively Mormon, had gone inactive as a teenager, I think. So she was used to wearing what she wanted, living the way she wanted. And so prior to settling that she would make my dress, I went to a wedding dress store, and I tried on, just for fun, I guess, the most beautiful, like sleeveless, strapless, gorgeous dress. And I remember feeling like so beautiful, like amazing. And the people I was with, you know, it was just like, well, too bad, you know, shrug, like, you can't wear the dress that you want. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. And I remember, you know, taking it off and giving it back. And I was wearing like a black lacy bra for that, while I was on that shopping trip, and someone said or something that made me feel bad about that. And then, so I'm feeling bad about just like, but I like wearing this. I like feeling sexy. I like feeling beautiful. But it's not a good thing. And then simultaneously, my husband's like lamenting and pining because he's dreading when I have to start wearing garments. He didn't want me to, because he just he knew that would, like, I mean, I was already being good and following the rules and covering my shoulders and stuff. But, you know, if we were embracing or whatever, he could tell it was just like a shirt and my skin. That's it. Like, versus like layers and the cardigan with the down east shirt and the garments and the bra, and like just so like much to work with here.
It's like lockdown, like all that you have to kind of
he was like not looking forward to it. But then at the same time, like, I still believed in I believed in these, in the all of it, the doctrines, the commandments. And I do want to, well, so my sister-in-law did, and we picked out this really beautiful vintage pattern that she would make this dress, and it was all lace with like this slip underneath. And because I was edgy, it wasn't a pure white dress. I knew that I wouldn't be able to wear it for the temple ceiling. I'd have to wear something different. So I bought a temple dress, and then I had my wedding gown that I couldn't wear because it wasn't pure white. I couldn't wear it in the temple. But the pattern was like sleeveless, and like both of us, it's like we're just like looking at each other, like we know that adding little t-shirt sleeves to this dress is it's gonna make it kind of tacky. But it's just it's not going to be the same, but it's just what we have to do. And she was such a good sport, and she put little sleeves on it for me. But I, you know, put that on and thought back to that one beautiful, like, strapless gown that I tried on. And it's just one of those sacrifices you have to make, you know. And speaking of sacrifice, I just, you know, if I were to reflect on my wedding day, the worst part of it was having to leave my family outside, you know, for my dad, my sister, my brother, to like fly to Utah to come to my wedding, but they couldn't, you know, and they literally were just standing outside in the cold. Like, it was a cold day in April. It was snowing that week. And I had kind of told them, like, Sam's family is really cool. These are the first Mormons they're going to meet. They're like, Mormons are cool. You just got to meet Sam's family. They're super cool. And they are. But then, like, to exclude them, like, I'm ashamed. That's the experience that we had that day, and I allowed that to happen. Like, I chose to go in the temple and get married and leave my family outside in the cold. I'm ashamed.
For our never Mormons, maybe explain why your family wasn't allowed to attend your wedding.
Well, because they're not worthy. I mean, I almost didn't make it in myself. So, I barely got the card in time to go in. So if you're not baptized, if you don't have a temple recommend, if you're not an active tithe paying member, that's another thing. You have to give money to the church to be able to access the temples. If you don't pay your tithing, you're not worthy. That's part of the interview. So they weren't members of the church. I was the only member of the church in my family. And and then at the time, they were like, it was just standard protocol to treat the Mormon temple sealing as, they'd say that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. So don't have another wedding ceremony, because that you don't want to cheapen or draw away from the real marriage, which is the temple sealing. But what is the point of a wedding? The point of a wedding is so that your loved ones can come and celebrate with you and witness the moment that you become partnered with the person of your choice, with your loved one. That moment, that's when everyone claps and cheers. My family got to clap and cheer when they saw me walk out of the temple, like after the fact. We walk out of the temple and there's this crowd of people, all the people who weren't allowed in, or there wasn't enough room or whatever. And then they clap and they give me hugs, but for what? For something they didn't even get to see, something they weren't even a part of. It's like a tragedy. And I don't know if there's also just like the visuals of it too. You have like the brown and black people like outside in the cold, and you have the white people on the inside wearing white. It's just like this contrast. And it's like, people will say, well, everyone's welcome in the temple. Anyone can go. You just have to do X, Y, Z
and pay the money. Right?
But why are there not a lot of black people in Utah or in the temple? Why is there a color difference here? There's a lot of reasons why. It's historical. So, did my dad meet missionaries in his life? Did he meet Mormons in his life prior to that moment? Could he have attended as an active Mormon? Sure, if he had accepted an invitation from one of those people. But, in his time, black men weren't even allowed to hold the priesthood. So he'd met some Mormon who refused to shake his hand because he was black. He experienced direct racist treatment from Mormon people. Mm-hmm. There were two things that he warned me about, saying, please don't join the Mormon church, if only for these two reasons. And he mentioned racism and the way that the Mormons treat women. And now that I've lived it and I've experienced those two things that he warned me about, I understand. But
so he had good reasons to not get baptized.
Yeah.
And yet he was excluded from his own. And by the way, he raised you as a single parent.
Yeah.
So, and yet he was excluded from his own daughter's wedding. Yeah.
This was the first, I was the first child to get married, the first child to have kids. And later I was so offended, I invited him to come to baby blessings, to come to baptisms, and he wouldn't come. He wouldn't set foot in a Mormon church. And I'd be like, well, why? That's so how rude that you're not showing up for me. But it's I didn't even make a way for him to show up for me when we got married, when I got into it in the first place. Why would he want to go into this environment? If he wasn't welcome for the ordinance of my marriage, why should he feel welcome to come to a baptism or a baby blessing? How's that any different? And
I just want to make a final point for our audience. This is not a practice that is just decades in the past. In 2023, it's very common still for non-Mormon family members to be excluded from Mormon temple marriages.
You just can't go in. You just can't go in without a card. Yeah. You can't get a card if you don't answer the questions. If you haven't jumped over the hurdles. And it's so sad, to go, everything is set up to be for families to look a certain way, right? So you go into the sealing room And it's always the same setup, no matter who you are. And there's like a chair for the mom and the chair for the dad for both the bride and the groom. And so I just had like empty chairs, you know, that Les Mis song, empty chairs and empty tables. But these people weren't dead exactly. I don't know about my mom. She could be, but no, they're just standing outside.
That's right.
It's an empty chair because we've all agreed to it. Like, because,
They were denied entrance.
yeah. Like, oh, it's just so sad. And this, I mean, and in the end, I think we'll get to this more thoroughly in part 4, but I'm just going to say it now. Like, when it comes down to it, it's all the reason why I can't be associated with this organization is DEI. That's a common acronym now: diversity, equity, and inclusion. What is the opposite of those terms? The opposite of diversity is conformity. The opposite of equity is inequity, and the opposite of inclusion is exclusion. Those three things, conformity, inequity, and exclusion, that is what the Mormon Church stands for, from my vantage point. My deepest core values now are diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am ashamed that when I got married, I did not stand for those things. Why was I not outside with my family? Why did I exclude them? Why were the people who were different outside? Why was I participating in a system that just screams inequity, where there's worthiness and unworthiness, where you answer a question yes or no, and if you answer no, you're out, and if you answer yes, you're in.
And some white dude gets to decide, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I just didn't have the courage at that age or at that time. And then I think I was just also ignorant and naive. And then the other fact is that I was believing. I just believed what I was being told. I believed that that's the way it had to be. And I look back and it's like, you know, my dad was so afraid of me joining the church and it pulling me away from my family the way that my mom's religious fanaticism pulled her away from the family, to the extent that she left us, abandoned us, cut off all communication and religion, and doing her missionary work in South Korea. That was part of it. Not all of it, but that was part of it. And so then I joined the Mormon church thinking like, it's all about family. I want this Mormon eternal family. I'm coming from a broken family. I'm looking for family. And yet ignoring the fact that I do have family. I do have a father who's sacrificing as a single dad to take care of me. I have siblings who I cherish. And I thought I could find some other form of family elsewhere, like a real family through Mormonism. And then in the end, you know, it's like, oh, the purpose of temples is to seal eternal families, to bring us together, to tie everyone together. When it's like, look at how the church is separating families on earth, how it's creating divisions between people in our life, in our mortal life. Like, who cares about the quality of your eternal relationships when they suck on earth? Because of what the church is teaching and telling you and the way that it's dividing you. You know, I didn't talk to my dad exactly about how he felt about being excluded and not in the room when I got married. But if I were him, I would never forgive me for that. I would hold that against me. And I wouldn't show up for my daughter's her children's baptisms. I wouldn't show up for my grandkids' baby blessings, because how can I forgive you for what you did to me there? You know, like, this church does not reflect true family values and connection.
That's powerful. Margie's nodding. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That is a really important topic to cover. Mostly Well, one, because it affects a lot of people. Margie's extended family stayed outside of the temple during our wedding.
Yeah, it's not just more. It's so exclusive that even amongst the Mormons, not everyone's allowed in.
Yeah.
It's that exclusive. Like, you talk about going and worshiping in the temple and as if like everyone's welcome at the temple, right? No, that's not true. But you talk about going to the temple as like a spiritual feast. And I'm just picturing like this tall, beautiful tower. And if you are able-bodied and you fit the right specifications, you can walk up the stairs to the feast at the top of the tower. And like, I went to the temple just a few months ago and I had a lovely experience. It's clean, it's beautiful. I'm someone, I admit this, I like money. I like being in places that feel classy. I like wearing nice clothes. I like nice things. So going to the temple is the country club of churches. You go in, you see the money. You see like the chandeliers, the carpet, the quality of everything. It's beautiful. If you're like I think one of the things that drew me to this church was like their buildings are nice. You know how I said like I would go in and I would feel safe? Because it's clean, it's well lit, the furniture's nice, like they feed you snacks, like they have money, they take care of you. That reflects on one of the superficial reasons that I married my husband. He's going to make money, he's going to take care of me. This church has money, it's going to take care of me. Go to the temple, it feels nice, you can see the money. So anyway, you go to the temple for this quote unquote spiritual feast, but it's also just, let me go to the country club, have a moment to meditate in the fanciest room that I will have access to. And then look out the window at all the other people if you compare it to a feast, what are they eating down there? Cheerios off the floor like my kids, or sandwiches. And so like, just a few months ago, I was at the temple and was like, what a nice experience. It's really lovely. It really is. I had a nice time. And then when I left, I thought like, I didn't recognize at the time that was my last time. I didn't know it. And I thought, but I thought about it, like, what would it be like if I left and I never went back to the temple? But then it occurred to me, like, I would, as nice as it is, as lovely as that experience was, if it's not for everyone, it's not for me. If it's not accessible to the least of us, I don't want anything to do with it. Mm-hmm. I don't care how nice it is. I don't care how good I feel. Like, I'm going to go have a picnic on the grass with the others who I love.
Yeah.
The rest of you, go ahead and have your feast at the top of the tower. That's not for me. Mm-hmm. That's not where I want to be, as lovely as it is.
Beautiful.
Yes, yes.
Thank you for that. And again, in 2023, this is still the way it is.
That's the way it is.
Really quickly, I have to go back to a comparison you made between your mom and you.
Yeah.
Like, I can imagine if there were like an observer just observing your life, mm-hmm. they would be looking at you. Like, I'm thinking of like the Clarence Angel in It's a Wonderful Life. He's like looking at you going, Liz, didn't you pay attention to what your mom did? She joined a religious, she joined a high demand religion, became religiously fanatical, and kind of like abandoned her family. Liz is an early 20-year-old. You're kind of following in those footsteps. Don't do it. But yet you kind of did. What can you say about your conditioning or your needs or your background that kind of had you follow in footsteps one observer might think you would want to avoid at all costs?
Can you tell I'm like ready to answer this question? Well, because I thought that the family that I was coming from was not the real family, that I was going to Mormonism so that I could have a real eternal family. So whatever my mom did was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to get married and have children and be together forever and not abandon my children. I wanted, so in my mind, joining the church and like, you know, absorbing the family proclamation and what it outlined for what my life should look like, and also what my patriarchal blessing outlined for me, was like the opposite of what I thought my mom did. And I, you know, I see and I still feel the effects of that abandonment. And I remember I think just a few days before I got married, I called my dad crying, saying, I have to know why she left. I never knew. Can you please fill me in? Because I don't want to do the same thing she did. I don't want to end up divorced. I have to know what happened so that I can just like avoid making the same mistake. Maybe, can you just please, like, just tell me the truth. Why did she leave? And that's when I learned about the elements of religion. So it was, I didn't know until like very well after I'd already gotten baptized and started going down this path. I didn't know.
What had happened?
Yeah, I
that's a
didn't know
long
what
time.
happened. Yeah.
That's a long
I
time.
mean, we had just been told like, oh, she's going to visit her family. And then she just like didn't come back. Like no explanation.
So you didn't have the information to fully process what had happened with your mom.
All I knew is like, I come from a broken family with parents who aren't together. And I see that in Mormonism, families are forever. And that's what I want, a forever happily ever after family. I want the dream. I want the ideal. So that's what I sought after. And you know, I have 5 kids now, and it's so hard. And I sympathize with my mom now more than ever. I understand how hard it is to be a parent, but I also understand the consequences, what happens when you leave your kids, when you walk away. So it's like, as hard as it is, like, I do remain committed to my kids and my family because I know what happens when you do walk away. So there is that as well. I mean, religion aside, obligations aside, commandments aside, just from my personal life experience, I feel compelled to be a committed wife and mother for the sake of my children. Yeah.
That product, you can almost call it a product that the Mormon Church offers, which is the eternal family. I remember when I was a teen and a missionary, there was the video "Families Are Forever" or whatever. It's on the one hand so compelling. Who doesn't want to be with the partner that they love and their children and their parents forever? So it's such a compelling product. I don't mean to reduce it to a product.
Oh no.
But it's so compelling, that vision. And but it's also problematic because even though that's a selling point, there's the dark side of the underbelly of that promise, which is everyone who doesn't get the Mormon conversion and the Mormon sealing, those families are going to be separated forever. So it makes God not necessarily this loving God that wants everyone to be with their families forever. It's this God who is going to be separating spouses and children from spouses for 99% of his children for eternity. Because
And
that's
I don't buy it.
But that's what the terrestrial
I know.
and the telestial.
I used to.
But not only that, though, it isn't just a Mormon, non-Mormon thing. It's, you can do all the things. You could all be Mormon.
Yeah.
You could actually be parents of Mormon children, have done everything you can. And if your child goes off and makes decisions,
is LGBT,
you
or
are also
loses their
not
faith.
having a family that lives forever. It's like, and that actually is more common than, you know, so the loss, it's false advertising, because the majority of people, whether you're in or out, aren't getting it.
Yeah.
But it is the lure, especially with converts, definitely from my parents. But the key part of conversion is that family dream.
Yes,
it's that
having the
piece of that basic need of like, can we never be separated ever?
It's the happily ever after. I mean, for me, like going to young women's activities, and suddenly they're like saying that I'm like a queen or like a daughter of God, like a princess. Like that's the Disney dream, you know. What? I'm royalty and I can have like I can be a queen married to a king and live in a castle. The temple's like the castle, you know, and then have the mansion in heaven. Like it's so picturesque. It's so
alluring.
So yeah. But you're saying like there was and I you know, I believe this and this is what I wanted, but there's a moment when I was in the temple across from my husband and on that like, you know, cushy altar benchy thing, you know, I was looking at him and I could tell he was just like not into it. And it had me worried. I was like, oh my gosh. Like,
well, the outfits are interesting.
Yeah.
What you're wearing. Do you want to describe what the outfits are when you're kneeling across the altar?
Yeah.
You're not in a beautiful wedding dress. Right?
I know. I couldn't wear my wedding dress there because it wasn't pure white. So I had just like a kind of a plain polyester dress, and both my husband and I are wearing like this kind of roby thing with like a fluffy thing on the shoulder, and then I've got a veil on and he's wearing this ridiculous hat. And that's what I could tell.
Some refer to it as a baker's hat.
Yeah, he did not like.
And you've got the green aprons.
The aprons, the sashes, the little bow.
There are a lot of accessories, people.
Yeah. Oh, the
and
slippers.
people can Google like Mormon temple wedding and see video of the ceremony.
And it's sacred to a lot of people, but it's also, it can still feel really disorienting.
Yeah, and he was never comfortable wearing all that stuff, and I could tell, he was just like, you know, here I am looking like a clown. He was just not into it. And he had told me about, I mean, he had such a traumatic experience when he went through the temple and did initiatories, and people were touching his body, his naked body underneath this like shawl thing. The temple was not a comfortable place in his mind. And I could tell that he was not at ease when we're getting married. Like, I have a friend planning her wedding right now for like, not even within a year. It's like, okay, spring 2024, it's going to be on the beach in Jamaica, destination wedding. And just, you know, I'm watching her plan this wedding where it's like, you just get to choose the details and create an experience that's comfortable and what you want, like what you just create a moment that reflects like the beauty of what you're doing. And
a celebration for everyone.
Yes.
It's actually fun.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. But, like what a, like, I love that idea of like having like my bare feet in the sand and like being with my partner and like being in a place that I chose and just like having this like a beautiful moment but you don't get to choose. I didn't even get to wear what I wanted to wear.
Yes. Yeah. I did want to bring up, just because there are parts to your story that I think you've highlighted. One was the try-on, I think, for the dress, where you talked about putting on was it a strapless?
Yeah, it was a strapless
and how
dress.
beautiful you felt and comfortable and just sort of, you know,
I felt
feeling
like,
all the things, and the black lace bra, and you actually in moments having an experience where you're actually connecting with yourself and feeling this sense of desire, having a want or a desire for yourself, right?
Something I wanted.
And it can come in with, you know, pleasuring yourself. It can come in with food. It can come in, in so many little moments that I think of, growing up Mormon or in the conditioning process of Mormonism, where you actually have a type of you want comfort, so you pleasure, or you actually have these, and then you feel this sense of shame afterwards, but that's bad, or
Yes,
I can't wear that,
right.
or I
Yeah,
can't.
yeah.
And it creates this distrust and this continual sense of where you're doubting yourself and you're always shaming yourself for the things that when you do emerge, which creates all these sort of parts to you that you're cramming down in the basement somewhere that you just never want them to come out. And then, it's I don't know. It just creates such a disembodied experience.
Yeah. Yes. And we'll talk more about how this in part 4, I think. But when presented with the suggestion to leave the church, I was digging my heels in, and something that I would say is you don't know how much I sacrificed to join this church. How I changed my life so that I could become a Mormon. And now I'm isn't that just listen to what I was saying. Look how much of my real self I had to shove down and push away, including me trying to fit into white culture. That was a thing. Just look at how much I was sacrificing. Yeah. To
your actual family,
fit in,
your identity, your ethnicity,
all those
your
things.
culture.
So it's your co-host John was saying this.
Larson.
John Larson was saying this last night about, why can't Mormons leave it alone? It's because look how Mormonism affects and touches every single aspect of your life, everything. And so, for me to say look how much I had to change to become Mormon. Look how much I sacrificed. Look how hard I worked to become Mormon. And it was making me dig my heels in. But once I was able to let it all go, what an amazing feeling to kind of fly through space and climb into my 13-year-old body and be you're just fine. This is who I was and this is who I am. And who I was and who I am are back in alignment because it's who I was the whole time. It's just I was trying to be something else in the interim.
Yeah. Powerful. Really quickly, anything you want to say about the actual endowment, or is that not super noteworthy? No pressure if it's not.
I mean, I really liked it. I really like something I was drawn to Mormonism. One of the elements is that it's weird and different, and I'm weird and different, and I appreciate the things that are strange. So I was really just excited to see what all the talk was about, what the endowment was all about, hand signs and little phrases and some chanting and the video. I thought it was all really fascinating and intriguing. It's one of those mysterious things that drew me in the first place. Was there's some whack rituals that I know are coming, and I'm pretty excited to find out what they are. So that kind of showy ritual kind of stuff, those formalities, I think it's really cool. Honestly, you see that in a lot of cultures and a lot of religions, but Mormonism takes it next level. I can't think of any other church that has an endowment ceremony quite like that, unless we dive into some cults. But that's one of the things that's kind of, that makes the church pretty cultish, is that that there's this ceremony. So I thought I was really honored at the time. Like I said, I was a hardcore believer. So when I was presented with my first pair of garments and got to put them on, it was really special to me. And I remember that day going back at my apartment, and me and Sam were just making out on the couch, intense makeout. And my roommate walked in And she was like, well, that's a great way to celebrate your endowment day, you know? And I was so embarrassed and ashamed because, like, you know, it's like, oh man, like being sexual in any way is incompatible.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I felt, you know, I was literally being shamed on the day of my endowment for like just being like letting some element of the natural man or the natural woman like escape.
That's right.
And show itself. The monstrous carnal side of me was still there, despite the garments, despite the cardigan, despite the down east layering shirt. Sorry, down east. I don't mean to like bash the brand.
And despite the most sacred Mormon ritual.
Yeah, and it was so much. I think in that moment I felt what I did like the very first time that I confessed to a bishop in a worthiness interview, where it's like, dang it, did I just undo what I just did? You know, like right after my baptism and sinning for the first time, like, did I just undo what I did? You know, and so there was that moment of reflection too, like, did I just, did I
ruin it?
Just ruin it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, we're still talking about like marriage and endowment, but we got to get through the fact that I have 5 kids.
Yeah.
That I'm going to end up with 5 kids.
So you got married, and where did things go?
Oh, you know, one of the worst things that I did, well, not worst, but a thing that I did, I've done the young women's recognition thing 3 times. So because I was in the young women's program.
And for the non-Mormons out there, isn't it kind of like a Boy Scout equivalent where the church had this program where you did a bunch of what they would call girly or womanly things?
Yeah.
And if you finished it by the time you were 18, you got a little
medallion, a temple medallion
that kind of symbolized your achievement of full womanhood or something. Is that right? Did I get it right?
Yeah. And so there are like 7 values, like faith, divine nature, individual worth, choice and accountability, good works, integrity, and virtue. And you do like little assignments and a project for each of those values. So for one of my value projects, you think Stan's out of the picture? He's not. Stan's mom, I still keep in touch with Stan's family, his parents. I idolized his mom because I wanted to be the next generation of her. I wanted to be her.
Yes.
Like she cross-stitched Christmas stockings for all her 9 children. I've been doing that. I'm not quite done, but I have hand cross-stitched these stockings for my kids.
There are some paths we're still on.
Yes. Yes.
Still pursuing with vigor.
But so for one of my young women's projects, I happened to be in Colorado Springs visiting my dad and his second wife at the time. And I arranged to sit down with Stan's mom and interview her about how to be a good Mormon mom. And I blogged this. I transcribed the entire interview. It's pages and pages and pages. And the interview, the entries, I think there are 9 parts. It turned into like, as you can see, I have a lot of stories to tell. Anyway, the interview in the published interview is called How to Have 9 Children Inside the Big Mormon Family. And here's a picture of one of my babies on the front.
So that's a book you put together.
Yeah, I was blogging, and so I have. I'm a writer, so I've got just like books of my writing, and this is what my journals became, essentially, like kind of a public journal. But so I sat down and I interviewed Stan's mom about how to be a mom, and I had 1 baby at the time. And she described to me all the ins and outs of how to manage a home with 9 kids, like the cleaning routines.
Do you want to share a couple things that stand out to you? Did you adopt any? Did you take?
Oh,
okay.
So much.
Yes.
This became my guide as I started having more children. And then, but what's sad though, is it set me up to feel like a constant failure. Because I had one kid and it was so hard, and I'd be like, but she had 9. Why am I struggling? Then I had 2 kids and it was even harder, and I was like, but she had 9 and she was keeping it together. What's my problem? And then, I end up with 5. It's even harder. I had so let's see. Then the twins were 3 and 4. That was earth shaking. The twins. Yeah. It was so hard. And again, but it's like, but I only have 4. What's my problem? And I have the 5th one, and I'm like, it's still not 9. Why am I struggling? What's wrong with me? And I would just compare myself to her in everything, like how she would clean the house from top to bottom every Monday cleaning. I started doing that for a while. I don't do it anymore. But Monday cleaning, and then Tuesday laundry, having everything washed and folded. And then the way that meals were prepared, the family scripture in the morning, the family prayer, the kids going to seminary, just the habits, the traditions, just all the things. That
I remember growing up meeting Mormon families like this, where there were like 8 or 10 or 12 kids, and the mom did it all.
Yes.
Like somehow all the kids looked perfect, and the meals were perfect, and the house was perfectly clean, and their marriage looked perfect. That is a thing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't every Mormon family, but there was always a couple of them in every ward, it seemed.
But
and it just looked like an Olympic world record kind of family.
there's a really important thing to recognize here. Like, she came from a really large family and was one of the older daughters, I think. So she had a lot of experience caring for little kids before she became a mom.
Yeah.
She knew what she was getting into. I didn't change a diaper until my 20s. I had no experience with little kids. Like, and we talked about this earlier about how, like, I picture having a large Mormon family similar to running a marathon, and the church, the way the church phrases it, it's like everyone
Yes, I love
is meant
this
to become
analogy.
a parent. Everyone is meant to do this.
Every like woman's body is able, right? Psychology is able. It just takes so many things for granted about
So
the complications of what is being asked.
right, in the marathon analogy, like, no, not every body is capable of running 26.2 miles. Some people can do it and actually enjoy the experience, but most people are going to suffer. It's going to be really hard, and some people just can't do it. And I feel so much like pain and longing in my heart for the moms who are, or mothers or fathers or parents who are struggling to raise their kids to the point where they don't even have the money to feed their children, or don't have the mental health in place to not harm their children.
Exactly.
Like, there are children suffering because their parents really believed that God would give them the strength to be a perfect parent, and they're not. They think it was their calling in life to become a parent, and then their children are suffering because they are struggling to do it. It's like sending people to run the marathon who haven't eaten the day before or something. Like, or they have a broken leg and but you're supposed to finish the race and you're supposed to do it. And it's really hard, especially, I don't know very many Mormon parents who will put their kids in foster care. Because I think there's sort of this God complex, where it's like, well, I was given these spirit children, they are mine, and I was meant to be theirs. I'm meant to be their parent. God's gonna make me the best parent for this person.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. Another big thing with when you have a lot of children, it's just privilege. It's just the privilege
to be able to
right? Whiteness. If the breadwinner is white, who grew up, with a level of stability in their life and had college and all those opportunities. And that's a really different we're looking at a really different playbook.
So, you know who else had 9 kids? Was one of my first cousins, who I didn't meet until after I was married. But he had 9 or 10, probably more kids with 5 or 6 different women. And this is the black side of my family that my dad didn't want us to associate with. You know, this cousin had like a bullet in his body somewhere, was living with his mom, my dad's sister, really had a very hard life. I think was always trying to keep a bit of money on hand for if he needed to pay for an abortion for one of these women. He just was like addicted to sex. Sam and I talked to him like, you could get a vasectomy. I can't believe the church discourages vasectomies and birth control. They still like, what is it with the church health insurance policy? They won't, I was reading something about this, like they won't cover a vasectomy unless you've already had 5 kids. It's like there's like a number, like a number associated with like the healthcare options. That's like I don't like to use the phrase mind blowing, but that's just the phrase that's coming to mind right now. But yeah, so we're like trying to talk my cousin into having a vasectomy because he just keeps having babies with all these different women. And so, you know, there's an example of childbearing in a different setting. But, and unfortunately, like he passed away. I'm trying to remember what it was, like maybe a sudden stroke or something. So he left like all these kids behind. And Sam and I actually considered adopting one of them. And, but that youngest one is doing okay. I think he's with the mother's mother. Oh, because his mom was killed in a fight. So that one kid was completely orphaned. And the only thing my cousin was able to do for all these kids, he said he would try to buy each of them a pair of shoes every year. That's the most he was able to pull off. Anyway.
So when you're talking about motherhood, I'm hearing a lot of comparing.
Yes.
You kind of your nest, which makes sense because, you know, we all need a blueprint of some type, right? And many of us had childhoods where there may not have been a natural blueprint. We got kind of what not to do, which is very different from like what you want it to feel like and to look like. And it sounds like, you know, you kind of got that through her, but then it became this comparison trap.
Yeah, constantly.
And so,
constantly.
How else would you describe your journey of mothering and trying to kind of, what would I say, move into this role, this Mormon woman role?
Oh my gosh, there's so much. There's so much. I mean, I was going to point this out. Like the moment when I got married and moved in, even before we had kids, I really took on like I am now a Mormon housewife. My husband works in the office. I am at home and I will wash all and do all the laundry. I will fold his garments neatly. I will put them in the drawers. I will make dinner. Hot dinner will be ready when he comes home from work.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I cooked and cleaned, and even before having kids, like I was really like taking on the persona, like, cause that's what I chose. That's what I chose to do. I wasn't the hippie artist on the road with my guitar and my convertible. I wasn't like, I had a convertible at the time, and I didn't even get to bring it with me that first summer. And so I had my first baby, and like the postpartum depression afterwards and during was so severe. And I had an opportunity came up for me to, a job opportunity came up just like miraculously for me to work in a violin shop. I had worked at BYU. I had worked in the instrument office as the string instrument person tech. So I had started learning some very basic like string instrument repair during that time. And so someone found out that I had some luthier experience and was like, hey, there's a job opening for a luthier at this violin shop. Are you interested? And I was like, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. Like, there's no way I cannot apply and interview for this position. Like, I have some experience. I'm really passionate about this. Like, lutherie making string instruments, violins, that really brings together two of my major passions, which is classical music and making things with my hands, art, making visual art. It brings those two things together. Like the craftsmanship of making an instrument, that is also like a classical instrument. Like, just like it's this great like love that I have. So I took that job. I got the job, and I put my first baby in the daycare across the street. And just, I felt so, I mean, that's when mom guilt came into play, and I still have it. Mom guilt. Like, I try to work, I try to do my art.
Why would a Mormon mom feel mom guilt for having a job? Explain that to the never Mormons.
Oh my goodness. Do we need to pull up the family proclamation? It says there's a line in there about like the men being the providers, and then, but it's like only in special circumstances, like if someone dies or it's like death or disability or like other circumstances that the women can step in and become a provider. I mean, it's just spelled out like that.
It's kind of like
part
the
of the
woman's
doctrine.
job is to raise and nurture the children. That's her primary role.
Yeah.
And to take care of the home. And it's the husband's job primarily to provide.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I saw like a graphic and this was for another conservative religion, but it kind of embodied this concept that I think is reflected in Mormonism. But it's like God rains down the rain, and the man is like the umbrella who protects and absorbs the sunlight and the rain from God. And then the woman and the children are underneath the umbrella. And then the man can disseminate what he receives from God to the women and children under the umbrella. And that's just the structure that I bought into.
Here, I've got the proclamation up. I'll just read
nice.
it. By this is called A Family, a Proclamation to the World, I think. It's put out by the Mormon Church First Presidency. I want to say 95-ish, but...
it was framed on the walls of the families that I converted me.
Yeah. This is just an excerpt. The family is ordained of God. Marriage between a man and a woman is essential to his eternal plan. Children are entitled to birth within the bonds of matrimony and to be reared by a father and a mother who honor marital vows with complete fidelity. Happiness in family life is most likely to be achieved when founded upon the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. Successful marriages and families are established and maintained on principles of faith, prayer, repentance, forgiveness, respect, love, compassion, work, and wholesome recreational activities. And here's the gendered part. By divine design, fathers are to preside over their families in love and righteousness. So dads are in charge. And are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for the family. So they're making the money and they're protecting the family. Mothers are primarily responsible for the nurture of their children.
It hurts. It hurts. Keep going.
Why does that hurt? No, we can stop. Why does that hurt?
No.
What hurts about that? We've never really talked about the proclamation on Mormon stories
You haven't?
in this way.
Not in this way.
No. Why does it hurt?
Because like, I mean, we might get into this later. I mean, gender, I'm not the most feminine female. I've always known that. We might get into like how I've come to understand my own gender identity, but like, to prescribe those roles, just barf. Like, okay, that's all, like barf, vomit reaction. That's how I'm feeling right now. But like, I have 5 sons and a husband. I'm the only biologically assigned female at birth person in my household. And already the young children are like, well, mom's clean. Moms do this. Moms
Cook.
yeah. And then like when I did start working and had by my second kid, that's when we had our first nanny. I have a nanny right now. But the nannies have also been female. So then they're like, okay, well, if mom's not available, there's still a woman who comes in and does the cooking and cleaning and laundry. And so they see, that's one of my biggest worries, is that I'm perpetuating this stereotypical, this stereotyped housewife woman role. Like this kind of work is only for women. When I know plenty of men who are, not plenty, but some who are the stay-at-home dads. Like it's not
And amazing nurturers.
Yeah. And honestly, like in a lot of ways, I feel like my husband's better with little kids than I am. We've talked about like, wouldn't it be great to like switch roles? But it's always come down to money. Like he makes more money than I do. Like I'm an artist, I'm a musician. Like unless I have some huge break and we keep hoping, like it's just like, I just feel kind of stuck in
it's another box.
Yeah. And, but we're now at a point where like I'm able to do more art. We can afford the nanny more than we could in the past. So there's a good balance right now, but still, I mean, like when my Ballet West audition opportunity came up, I had just had the twins. They were infants. And I was like, oh my gosh, like a bass spot opened up. I had been subbing with Ballet West and was like, this is my chance to like get a core spot.
Is this 4 kids in?
This is 4 kids in.
Okay.
Yeah. And like the opportunities for like a consistent, like classical music performance job are very rare. The competition, especially for like the Utah Symphony or like the big top orchestras, people fly in from all over the world to take those auditions. The competition level there is even higher. So like, so Ballet West is like a local company. They hire locally. I didn't think it's a part-time job, which is great for someone with lots of kids like me. So it was like just like the perfect orchestra job opening. And I knew like if I am going to have a chance at winning an audition, I have to practice my butt off. So I put my little twins, we called it the baby zoo. We gated off the living room so they could just be in the living room. And they were just on their own in the zoo. And I would be in the dining room next to them. And I just practice for hours and hours. And I also, at the time, there was a woman in my ward who knew how hard having twins, she saw how hard it was. And she offered as an act of service to come over for 5 hours a week and help me with anything I needed help with. Laundry, cleaning, if I needed to take a nap, if I needed to go exercise, whatever. And then we ended up hiring her to be our first nanny it'd been a while since we'd had a nanny. But then there were ladies at church who were like talking smack about me and her and saying like, doesn't Liz know she just had the twins? Why is she having what is she doing? Like practicing, like trying to get a job right now with infant twins? People were questioning like, doesn't she know? She should be home. Why is she playing her bass with a nanny? Like, what is she doing? But like, I want to see it. I did well and I got a spot and like, I cherish that. Like I love what I do, and I know, and I worked really hard to get that spot. But yeah, I'm not like I am a working mom. It is what it is.
And even in 2023, when a Mormon mom takes on a professional, job opportunity, it reminds me of kind of the sexual shame and the masturbation guilt. It's just another layer of inadequacy and guilt and shame that I'm hearing that you layer on. Is that right?
Totally. Like I'm a really good cook, and I used to like doing it, but after having my kids throw my food on the floor so many times, it's actually become like I really do think I have like clinical level PTSD associated with cooking for children, because when I get extreme anxiety around the act of preparing food for kids, especially cooking from scratch, because it's so much time. And then the moment somebody complains or dumps it on the floor or spits it out, like I have like a very intense reaction. That's so like, long story short, like we eat a lot of takeout. And in Mormon culture, that's not like...
It's not the way.
No, it's not the way.
As Mandalorian would say, this is not the way.
Yeah. I mean, when there was this really interesting period when I had two kids between the second and then we have the older kids, and then just a 5-year gap because I really wasn't sure about having any more. Sam talked me into having a third. That turned into twins. And then number 5 was an accident. But sort of, because I always wanted a girl. And I'm also ashamed of the fact that I wanted, like, that I had any preference about gender. I'm ashamed of that. But anyway, so the 5th one was the try for the girl, and he's a boy. But I don't think all of my boys are especially masculine, and I'm excited about that.
Gender fluidity.
Yeah, I have one who I am really excited. He likes shopping with me. He likes smelling perfumey soaps with me. He likes pretty things. He wants me to teach him how to knit. Like, it's great.
Yay. Yay to fully embodied humans.
Oh, I'm so excited. But anyway, when I had 2 kids, I lived in like a Mormon commune. Sam was at business school at Cornell in Ithaca, New York. I had to leave my violin shop job. Devastating. Every time we moved so that I could follow my husband's career and schooling, because he made more money, and like, why would we ever stay somewhere where I had a measly job that didn't bring in very much money? Like, Ivy League business school or like dinky violin shop? Like, obviously we're going to choose to go like on the path that leads to more money. So in Ithaca, there's an apartment complex where the Mormon families live. It's really an exceptional, unusual. It's very much like the BYU married housing, but in New York, in upstate New York. So we moved in, and so I'm surrounded by the wives of their husbands are in graduate school. And then most of them had like 1 or 2 or 3 young children. We're all in kind of the same boat. And I remember living directly across the hall from a little Mormon family. Her kids, she had 2 boys that were the age of mine. But like they were so Orthodox and devout. They did all the things with the scripture study, the family home evening. She cooked from scratch every night, these amazing, healthy meals. I would just smell what she was cooking from across the hall. But she was doing the same for me. She'd be like, oh my gosh, Liz does this and this and this. And so we were both like comparing ourselves to each other, not just this, but there was another couple upstairs. There was another couple or little Mormon family upstairs, little Mormon family beneath us in the basement. Like, it was just this like a terrible time where all of us were comparing ourselves to each other. And I remember one time I made like these from scratch buttermilk biscuits in the shape of like dog bones for my son to take to preschool for this, like a special pet day or something. And then one of my kids like accidentally stepped on the pan of biscuits and crushed them. And I was so upset. And then my neighbor across the hall, she was like, what is it called when you take joy in someone else's
Schadenfreude.
Yes. when you take pleasure in someone else's pain. And she was like secretly like happy that had happened to me, because she saw me as like a perfect mom and was like relieved to see when something didn't go perfectly for me. And like I felt the same way when I noticed her failures as well. It was like comforting to me. And there was one time I remember her like running into our front doors faced each other. So we like ran into each other at the front doors, and she was leaving to go on a run, and it was like nighttime. And I was like, where are you going? She's like, I just have to get away. Like, I don't know how far, I don't know where, but I just have to run away. Like she physically had to run away because it was so hard. And there was just this moment where she showed me her humanity, that even for her, it was so hard. She just put on her shoes and just ran off into the night. She came back, but.
And from a Mormon woman and mother perspective, what was going on there, if you had to describe it kind of at a higher level? Just perfectionism, competitiveness, standards, what dynamic are you kind of speaking to, if you were to put words to it?
It was like, it's like a circus or a talent show. And it goes back to this interview with Stan's mom, where it's like, you see some similarities in the way people are doing things, and it appears that there is a way, like, that there is an ideal, that there's, and perhaps it's cultural. People talk about like culture, the culture of the church versus the doctrine of the church, when you can't divide them so cleanly. Anyway, it was just one of those times where the comparisons were just in your face all the time. It's really hard. I mean, because all of us were struggling. It was hard. Like, it's hard to have little kids. It's hard to have toddlers. And so, of course, we're always asking each other, like, well, what are you cooking this week? What's on your, some of them had chalkboards with the menu of the week. I was not that organized. Some of them would do like these picnics, like they'd put a blanket down and their kids would have a picnic, like a chicken nugget picnic, and it was a way to like make the meal fun, or like, oh, let's do like an orange dinner where you have like carrots and chicken nuggets and mac and cheese and things are color coordinated. And just like we're sharing ideas on like how to, just like ways to parent. And when you're sharing ideas of like how to do the thing, whether it's parenthood or how to be a good Mormon, how to do it well, it's really hard not to internalize what someone's saying about how you should live as like the right way. I think what's coming to mind, what's unique about one of the things I liked about Mormonism, what's kind of weird is that it's a lay church. Is that the right term? Where like the average Joe Smith, the average Joe can go up and speak on Sundays. Like just people from the congregation speak, testimony meetings, or for the Sunday talks. The sermons are just by normal people. And so like anyone can go up from week to week or from day to day and share what they feel is God's counsel or the revelation that they've received, showing them the right way to live. And then from the pulpit, you have just average people sharing with the other congregants their best advice. They won't call it advice, but essentially offering different prescriptions on like how to live the best life. And then I just found that the more time, the more years that passed as a Mormon, it's just more and more prescriptions that are slightly different. And initially, when I was converting, I thought it was explained to me that, I always loved the concept of personal revelation. And I was like, well, how is this going to work? What if one person receives a revelation that contradicts someone else's? Like you'll see at BYU, someone gets a revelation that you're my eternal companion. But what if the other person's like, no, I didn't receive the same revelation? Like, how do you deal with those contradictions when the revelations aren't lining up? But it was explained to me when I was a teenager that like God won't give revelations that contradict. Like he just won't. Like and you trust the hierarchy. So the father in the home will receive revelation for the family, and then you've got the bishop, and you've got the general authorities, and then you have the prophet, and the prophet will receive revelation from the whole church. It doesn't leave a lot of room for your personal revelation to trump. I hate that word. To trump any of the
override.
Yeah, override. Any of the revelation that's received in the levels above you. So you're left with kind of very few choices. But that's one of the big issues is that the more time, the more years that have passed, I have seen and observed and heard so many contradictory revelations that I'm no longer able to explain or sift or organize them in a way that makes sense. And then in the end, I received my own personal revelation to leave. And how do you, from an outside perspective, how do you make sense of that? How can God tell you that that's the path?
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? Mm-hmm. And yet it does.
Can we go back really quickly to the mother strapping on her shoes and needing to, because that time that you're describing of kind of being in close proximity with moms, like Mormon moms, I just, as you were kind of relaying that experience, a lot of things came up for me.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about how in the church, and let's just break it down into particularly with roles, with this idea of really defined roles, it can feel really lonely as a new mom. It can feel very isolating. So what happens, and I remember this, is you do this natural thing of you try to reach out.
Yeah.
And you are asking, you're like, okay, so what dinners are you making? Or what do you do in this situation? And it's this attempt to get connection. It's like an attempt for help, for support, for connection. But what's hard is when the overlay is performance, when the overlay is perfectionism, what happens is you compare.
Yeah.
So whatever is incoming, it becomes kind of if it's not a strong suit of yours or you're not, and believe me, like inevitably someone you talk to is better at it than you or seems to be better at it. And you wouldn't know because when it's performative and perfectionism and this is the way you have worthiness in a system, people aren't telling because part of the prescription in the role is that it be easy, that it look easy, that it look innate to you. Because if it doesn't, that's on you. That's actually a deficiency in you. So it creates this whole trapped scenario where you're lonely, you're trying to get connection, but you can't get it because perfectionism is like a shield. It actually makes
you can't
it
show
really
all your
hard.
cards.
right?
Yeah,
And
you
so
can't be
it becomes this highly combustible place where you can't get your needs met. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And no matter what you try, the basic ways that you try to get support don't work in this way. And so it just reinforces this sense of shame and inadequacy, because no matter how much effort you're giving, it's never quite the ideal. Or you're up against someone in your ward who's doing it better and makes it look easy, because they're all trying to make it look easy, because that's the way they get worth and that's the way they're on the right path. And it's just incredibly isolating and degrading.
I know, yes.
To women in that situation. So as you were talking about that, I was just so feeling those moments of like strapping up your shoes and I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
Like I got to just have a moment. I'd be surprised for a lot of Mormon moms if there aren't moments where they can absolutely go back to, even if they didn't strap on the symbolic shoes, where they needed something. You know, even my mom, I remember, shared kind of when your dad got home, I was out of there, or, you know, it's so relatable.
Meaning she would just hand the kids off to him.
My dad,
so that he
to
could
be
take
like,
over.
I gotta
she needed
have a moment.
Moment. Yeah. And I mean, for my own mom, she needed a moment, and that moment lasted
A lifetime.
it lasted for the rest of her life.
She's never come back.
I get it. Yeah. I get it.
Yeah. Part of it is just that not all women end up feeling as comfortable as moms and or as moms of several children. And not all Mormon women feel fulfilled or enjoyment in motherhood. And many don't feel whole or complete unless they have some sort of professional pursuit.
That's me to a T. I mean, at this period of time in Ithaca, when we were in that Mormon family commune, of all the women, I was the one who used babysitting the most. And I felt guilty about that, like, especially when you're a student and you're spending money on babysitting. But I had this really cool opportunity to apprentice with a luthier, and started building my first violin. I haven't finished it, but I started building my first violin from scratch. And it was an amazing opportunity. And and I couldn't do it without childcare. People are always like, Liz, how do you do all this stuff? Like, you wrote a book and you play in the orchestra and you do all this stuff. You're acting. And I'm like, dude, I have a nanny. Like, I wouldn't be able to do any of this without childcare. That's the piece that people aren't seeing. And maybe they don't want to see it. Maybe they don't. Because like there's so many women specifically who are like, man, Liz, you accomplished so much. How do you do it? And I'm like, well, can I ask, like, I'll flip it. Can I ask you how many hours of childcare a week do you have so that you can do the things that you like to do, whether or not you're being paid to do those things or not? I mean, I think one of the ways that I've become like a professional musician or artist is there was a point where I had to say, because I have children and I have to afford childcare, I cannot work for free. I cannot play music for free. I can't make art for free. Like in the church community, people expect you to make music for free,
Right.
like play on Sunday. Play in the orchestra at Temple Square and don't get paid. Tour with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir with no compensation, even if you're leaving your kids at home. Like
Such an important point.
Yeah, like I mean, I toured. I think I had kids when I went on a tour.
Like
There's a
international tour?
cost. No, just like a one in the States.
Okay, national tour.
But like, there are times. I mean, when you have kids, time is money. Like, I don't. Almost my. Honestly, my entire paycheck from playing with the ballet goes to childcare. That's just how it is. I cannot play music for free. I can't paint stuff for people for free. I kind of wish I could. And unfortunately, like, that's made it so that I rarely do things like that for myself. Like, I don't have a painting in our house for just our family. Like, I haven't taken the time to do that, but I'll do a commission for somebody else. Or like, I'll sing the occasional lullaby to my kids, but how often do I like perform music for my family? Not almost never, but I'll play for somebody else if I get paid.
It's interesting. Yeah.
So anyway, I do feel lucky that there's at least there's a movement of funding that allows for a nanny to even be in my life. But I know that there are many, many, many women who cannot afford, not just women, many families that can't afford childcare. And so that limits the opportunities that the adults have. It's just the way it is.
So hard. So hard.
But going back to this Ithaca period, I wasn't getting paid to do this apprenticeship. So it was easy to just be like, what's up with Liz? Like, how are they spending money on this much babysitting so that she can go like play with wood, go to a wood shop, work on a violin for what purpose, And there were, at this point in time, this was the second time, there are 2 times when I've been accepted to a school, a program, and I've turned it down. So before we had kids, I was accepted to a creative writing MFA and didn't take it. And part of it always comes down to like money. Well, can you make money with a creative writing MFA? How are you going to pay for it? Turned it down. And then I started having kids. Okay, then I got accepted to the Violin Making School of America in Salt Lake City. But, and there was like a possibility that maybe after business school, my husband would get a job here. But he didn't at that time. Now we're here. And why am I not at the school? Because we had 3 more kids. So anyway, I got accepted to this school, and I had some Mormon women tell me like, Liz, like, you've chosen your path in life. You're a mom. Like, if you go to school, that might keep you from having more kids. You need to support your husband's career. He's in business school. This makes no sense for you to try to go to school when he's just finishing school. Like, you have to respect that he's investing in his future profession. You have to support that. You've made your choice already. Like, and I was told I was being selfish and spoiled and bipolar for having this intense creative desire to go back to school. and I didn't go. I was convinced by the voices that
And they
it
were
wasn't
women.
my place. Yeah, there were women telling me this.
Which is so how I think it oftentimes plays out, right? That
Yes.
women are oftentimes the the curators or to patriarchy. We reinforce
enforcers almost.
Well,
and
especially
in a way that is more. It can feel more insidious and personal than men. Because it's like a fellow woman being
There's the previous generation of women. This is coming from the older women. And this is something that I've noticed where the older women who have had their kids and they have grandkids now, it's like they just watch the next generation of women having babies, and they see them suffering and they see them feeling trapped or boxed up or whatever. But then they're like, because that's what they experienced when they were young mothers, they're just like, it's your turn now. That's just how it goes. It's like they don't want to step in and help you overcome these challenging circumstances. They just will say they'll just say well, I had 9 kids. You have 3 or 4 or 5. I had 9.
which in a way is just sort of like I suffered, so suffering is yours.
Yeah, they're just like this. It's your turn. It's
That's
your
right.
turn.
Let's just pass it down.
Yeah, it's just what women do. It's your turn. And they just watch. They just watch you suffer. And then they reflect on their own past suffering and just, what is it? Go back to the story of Adam and Eve, that Eve toiled. What is the line?
Thorns and thistles and noxious weeds that Eve, convinced Adam
Or
to
just-
partake of the apple. And,
Well, the bit about her like bearing children in pain.
oh, right.
Like there's something about Eve is supposed to be in pain.
Mm.
It's just part of the woman's job, the woman's plight, the woman from the beginning. It was the woman who suffers in childbirth and carries the weight of the babies in the womb.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sorry in those moments that you weren't actually celebrated for tending to yourself, to, actually giving yourself some time and space for your identity.
I mean, I would be remiss to not recognize the people who have always praised me for that, who admire me for going after my dreams.
Who is that?
A lot of, I mean, who was the greatest champion of my creativity was my dad. Anytime I mentioned some fantastical dream, some big dream to him, he'd be like, you can absolutely. I know you. I know your creative spirit. I know you could do that.
Wow.
But I'd say that to Mormon mothers or others who don't know me so well, and they'd be like, that sounds a little out of reach. So for me to say, like, I want to be an actress. I'm going to be an actress. At this point in my life, this was last year, I want to be an actress. and like, people who don't know me might be like, oh, that's kind of far-fetched. But the people who know me well know that I'm going to do it. I'm actually going to do it. So I've been doing that.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Okay, so there's this Ithaca period. Mm-hmm. The kind of overriding themes for this episode are marriage and motherhood. What are the other? Marriage moves and maternity. What are some of the other key Mormon stories in this part 3 that you want to make sure get included before we talk about move to part 4, which is your deconstruction?
So, there's the fact that I had opportunities for higher education that I turned down. There were some things that developed. I want to talk about real quick, just 2 kind of major job opportunities that presented themselves that challenged the idea of me totally being a stay-at-home mom. When I got married and fell into this housewife role, there were 2 things that happened immediately that were disconcerting. I stopped writing in my journal and I stopped writing music. It's like I felt like I couldn't. It was that thing about like, can I be an artist and a mom at the same time? I've always struggled with that. I finally had this idea. It was the alter ego, Lizzie Luna, to become like a children's musician. I was like, what about that? So I wrote a whole bunch of songs and I put out an album of children's music, and I created this program called Yoga Storytime and Songs. This was in Kansas City after business school. And it was a way that I could write music, but also involve my children. So like I could be an artist and a mom at the same time through this persona. I wasn't yet comfortable. I don't think it's a coincidence that I've finally been able to write my first song as myself post just around my resignation, which we'll get to. But so I created this program, and it was immediately like embraced by the community in Kansas City. And I was working on this deal with this organization that would pay me to take my program through the schools in the school district. Like it was going to be a job. And then 2 things happened simultaneously. I was like doing a children's yoga training in Florida, and then my husband informed me that he got a job opportunity in Salt Lake City. And I was devastated because I was just getting this deal to do my program in the Kansas City school districts. And I was getting my children's yoga certification when I was being told this news. So I was super upset. And then at the same time, my husband kind of talked me into like having a third kid. And I remember this conversation where he was like, mental health, depression, these were all big things. And he was like, listen, if the deciding factor is like, if what would allow us to have another kid is like having daycare or a nanny or house cleaning or whatever it is you need to have the support that you need to like bring another life into the picture, like I'm totally down with that. Isn't he great? So I was like, okay, all right, we'll do one more. And then the week we moved, the week of our move to Salt Lake City, I went to an ultrasound appointment, the 20-week checkup, just anatomy scan. I had already knew I was having another boy because I did the blood test. The ultrasound tech was like, you've had an ultrasound before? And I was like, yeah. And I was referring to like previous pregnancies, but I hadn't yet for that pregnancy. And she's like, so there are two. And we're like, two what? Arms, legs? She's like, two babies. And we're like, what? Like we found out we were having twins more than halfway through the pregnancy at the 20-week ultrasound. So 2 weeks after we moved into our house in Salt Lake City, the twins were born. And then about 2 years later, boy number 5 joined the team. And I've been absolutely in over my head. It makes people sad when I say this, but I don't know if it's true or not, but I often just think anyway, and sometimes say it out loud that like, I don't know if I was cut out for this. I'm one of those people where like, it's not coming super naturally to me. And that's why there are many reasons why I work part-time, is in doing all of the creative things that I do. Part of that is because that's who I am, and I cannot not create things. I'm a creative person, and I will literally lose my mind if I don't keep that part of my brain working. I think in the very first episode, I mentioned that like these storms brew in my mind, and it has to rain. It just has to rain. So the things that I'm imagining have to become real. They have to come outside of my head, or I start collapsing internally. But also like I've had these great nannies, and then my husband's a great example of like people who are just like really good with kids.
Yeah.
I'm finding I'm getting into an interesting phase where like my 12-year-old and I feel really good with like teens. And like, so my 12-year-old and I are like two peas in a pod. We are like really connecting at this age, but like the toddlers, it's really, really hard for me. Like the messes, the noise. Like I think about the mom in Pride and Prejudice who's always like, my nerves. That's like totally me. We're like, it's so loud. They're screaming, they're throwing, they're breaking things, they're moving, they're throwing furniture.
Yeah.
The 3-year-old broke our TV this week. The twins broke 2 TVs. The oldest broke 1 TV. And so it's just naturally, it's the youngest's turn to break the biggest TV we've had. Just like, it's just constant. Like, the bleeding, the fighting, the yelling, the shouting. There's the wonderful things too. The laughter, the snuggles. I love sharing my bed with my kids, my littles. At least 1 or 2 of them will crawl into our bed every night. They're, of course, those wonderful, beautiful things. But it's sort of like, again, the marathon analogy where like, yeah, there are those moments, those moments of triumph, like when you cross the finish line and they take your picture and you're like, you did it. Every day feels like a marathon with as many kids as we have. But there are those moments you don't see, like where the marathon runner is like vomiting in the grass on the roadside because their body's like shutting down, that kind of thing. You don't see those pictures in the Sports Illustrated magazine.
Yeah.
Alongside the swimsuit models.
Yeah. Really quick, there's something that I I want to kind of tease out what feels very Mormon or familiar to me. Margie and I were kind of smiling at each other off camera. One of the very Mormon elements of your story that felt very familiar to me is this dynamic of the husband. Is the wife the Mormon mother having a sense for how many kids kind of feels right to her, but then the husband wanting more than whatever that number is, and doing whatever he can to persuade her to have more kids than what she feels might be right for her.
Yeah.
Margie and I had that exact experience.
Really?
Margie, did you? Is that one of the reasons you were smiling?
Yeah.
Like
right?
when the husband's like, I want to have more. And the mom's like, I don't know.
And it's not the husband that the Mormon husband that's going to be home with those,
Right.
Babies and 2 and 3 year olds. He's going to be at work, traveling internationally, feeling super fulfilled and gaining new skills and having all these opportunities. And it's going to be the mom that may want to have a professional career, may want to go to graduate school, may want to have some enriching life experiences comparable to what the husband is experiencing, but no, you're going to have a few more kids.
Yeah.
That felt familiar
it
to me.
kind of puts off. I mean, yeah, like we've been waiting for the littles to go to elementary school. We're not there yet. We've got 2 in pre-K and 1 who's not in school at all. He's like the baby.
Yeah.
He's just potty training. Like he's just barely getting out of diapers.
Still like boot camp years.
Yeah, we're barely getting out of the diaper phase. So there's always been the talk of like, well, when all the kids are in school, you'll be able to do more. But I just couldn't wait that long. That's why we've got a nanny. I just couldn't wait to
I think
do
I
stuff.
love the idea of support.
Yeah.
Recognizing and having a
It's
team.
so it's so like, again, I just have this like longing and desire. I wish that more, I know that there are women and men, there are parents who are struggling to just make ends meet, struggling to just keep people fed. Like, I have so much going for me. Like, my husband's got this stable job. We have our health. We've got a nice, comfortable home. We have all this stuff going for us. And even for us, it seems almost impossible. How are people doing it who don't have financial stability, who don't have their health, who have more kids than they can afford or psychologically handle?
Yeah.
How are they doing the impossible? We feel like it's impossible, and we have so much going for us. It just, you don't know what's happening behind closed doors. There's a lot that's going down. And occasionally there are the blips. Like we saw that the whole family murdered in that Mormon family murdered recently. And the people are like, we had no idea that this dad had this in him, that he was capable. We had no idea. Like, how could this happen to this beautiful Mormon family? But it's like, and look how much they had going for them. Nice house, nice clothes, cute family pictures. What about the people that don't even have those basics? They're trying to do it successfully.
Yeah. And what I've noticed during my time in Utah is an almost epidemic of depression, Mormon mother depression, Mormon mother anxiety, Mormon mother perfectionism, Mormon mother subscriptions to, antidepressants, kind of an epidemic of depression amongst Mormon women.
Or like the amount of makeup and plastic surgery in Utah, it's trying to be the ideal, failing.
And I think it's one thing to have an ideal and to kind of set out, all these expectations or, whatever requirements for women in particular in this role. It's another thing to have all those expectations, and then make the, the consequences so grave, to make the responsibility like where a woman and her role and how she shows up in the family basically is tied to her family's salvation. Like, that's next level. You know, the expectations are one thing. It's another thing if what's really kind of being said is like, and if your kids don't get there, you don't have an eternal family and you're to blame.
Yeah.
That I just feel like no wonder.
heavy.
I mean, no wonder.
So heavy. There's one more thing I wanted to mention before we move into the next part, because this is really a turning point and I think a catalyst for what's happening next. And it involves my dad. So my dad was very conservative, military man, very, the military was like his life. He had a lot of guns. I didn't know that he had so many guns. And then one time we were visiting, and this visit was very strange because it turns out he had a fiancée. This would become wife number 3 that I didn't know about. So you may remember that he got married to this second wife and I didn't find out until almost a year later that he married.
Yeah.
So then we discovered like that second wife, it took us a while to figure out that she'd left. And one of the ways I knew is that I invited myself, like, can I come visit on this weekend or whatever? And immediately he was like, yeah. And I was like, wait, you don't have to run it by the wife, who sometimes would say no. Like I was saying, like, I couldn't just like go visit home, but it wasn't home anymore. I couldn't visit whenever I wanted. So I was checking in, like, can I visit? And it's like, oh, I can? Like, and then it was discovered that wife number 2 was gone. So then enters the picture wife number 3, who is my age, which is interesting because I'm the youngest kid. Like she's literally like, our birthdays are just a few weeks apart. So this is like young woman, my age. And in the same visit, we discover that she exists. He has a fiance and she's like, yeah, we're going to have a wedding and you guys can come. I'm like, oh, okay. And then my kids are playing Duplos on the floor. And my oldest son was probably like 7 at the time. He found a loaded gun under the couch. Like some of the Duplos went under the couch. He was reaching for his Legos and he finds a loaded gun. And like, I freak out. I make everybody get out, all the kids out of the house, face my dad. And I'm like, I'm not bringing my kids back in there unless you put all the guns away. He's like, okay. And he goes back in and comes out a short while later. There was like, in a room where they would play, there was a mirror. If you opened the mirror, behind it was like loaded gun with like this magnetic holder and like a stash of ammo. So I knew about the secret closet too. And I was like, how about the mirror? Did you move the gun behind the mirror? Like that one? And he's like, okay. And he goes back in the house and there wasn't a gun safe. I don't even know where he was putting them, like just in his closet or something. Anyway, but after that visit, I was like, I'm never taking my kids back in that house. It's not safe. And then what became the last time that I saw my dad, I had sort of, my perspective of what eternal families mean started changing. I started kind of losing faith in the old Mormon standard eternal family because, you know, there is a lot of emphasis on family history and connecting generations and the hearts of the children turns to the fathers and stuff like that. And I was just not having a good relationship with my dad. And I started feeling like, you know what? I think it's time for us to just like, I was sort of choosing estrangement because I was like, I'm not going to initiate anymore. If he calls me, maybe I'll answer, but I'm going to stop trying. Like, I was offended that he didn't come to the baptisms and the baby blessings. He never came out to see me perform with the ballet as many times as I invited. I was not allowed to come visit sometimes when I wanted to. And then he and the third wife got married and we weren't invited. And I just was like, I've just had it. Like, whatever. Like, I'm done trying. Like, sure, if he calls, I'll answer. And it's like, there's another aspect where like, I felt like I always needed to prove to him that like Mormonism was right for me. Like anytime I felt like I couldn't leave the circumstances I was in because because I was trying to prove something to him as well. That's sort of a different topic, but anyway, I was getting really involved with Black Lives Matter 2020. I helped launch the Utah Black History Museum, which is this mobile museum. I'm not on it anymore. You might understand the concept of nonprofit burnout, but I burned out with the nonprofit and I've moved on. But anyway, I was really involved with Black Lives Matter in Utah. And the last time I went to visit my dad, he was volunteering at a gun museum, like a military museum. And I like drove out there to pick up my kids because they went on the tour with him. And there was like this panorama thing set up with like a real car and a dummy. And it had a sign that was like, this gangbanger was listening to his rap music too loud. It was this really racist thing with like bullet holes in the car and like fake blood paint. And then the dummy's dead, like feet hanging out of the car kind of thing. And I was like, this is disgusting. And I climbed out of the car and I could hear like guns firing at the range, like right next to me. And I was like, someone's going to shoot me. But I like couldn't not do something about it. And I had a paint marker in my bag that I was using to like paint the Black History bus. And I like climbed through the barbed wire and like I crossed out the thing like about the rap music and was like, this gangbanger was listening to his country music too loud. Black Lives Matter. Like snagging my Taylor Swift sweater on the barbed wire. Anyway, and I didn't let my kids in my dad's house. It's just this like moment where like I just so angry about gun culture and racism and all these different things.
Can I ask a couple questions about that? Mm-hmm. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So obviously your dad having guns isn't necessarily a Mormon thing per se because your dad was a Mormon, but we know that Utah is steeped in gun culture.
Yeah.
In addition, you talk about, we jump forward to 2020 or whatever, we talk about Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. You think about Utah, if Utah's on a spectrum in terms of supporting things like Black Lives Matter versus, quote, Blue Lives Matter, or more, I'll just say MAGA, conservative Trump kind of religious politics, or politics versus more Democrat or liberal or progressive, Utah certainly is to the right. Mm-hmm. Can we back up a little bit and talk about, as a Mormon woman now living in Utah who is biracial and half African-American, how you're experiencing, and I know some of this is going to come into the fourth episode, but like as a believing Mormon, active Mormon woman who's half African-American, how are you experiencing Utah as it relates to the police brutality, to, the average Mormon or the average Utahns' reaction to Black Lives Matter? Is that something you want to talk about? Or say?
Yeah, I mean, this is when a lot of things started to break down in my head, in terms of my devotion to the Mormon people. I used to like worship all things Mormon and related to Mormon families, Mormon everything. But the connection between politics and religion, especially in this state, you can't deny it. You can't get around it. I mean, even the flow of money, I feel like, is it like the church makes statements and appeals to the Republicans because they're the ones who are paying the most tithing? I don't know. Like, it's such just getting it really involved with Black Lives Matter, that was the moment. And I wrote this in my letter that you read, but like, when I got involved with Black Lives Matter, it's when I joined the team of artists who painted the Black Lives Matter mural at City Hall. And I knew there was going to be a lot of press around it and interviews. And then as I got more involved and became the director of the museum, there's a lot of press following us around and interviews and features about the museum and Black Lives Matter and my involvement. And I decided in 2020 that I would not let on that I had any affiliation to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If anyone was interviewing me about Black Lives Matter, it seemed so contrary. Like, it didn't seem to make sense. I didn't feel like people would take me seriously as an activist, as someone who truly believed the things that I was standing up for, if I hinted at any affiliation with the Mormons.
And I think what I want you to do, if it's all right, is fill in why you felt that way. In other words, you're now living in Utah as a biracial woman who's half African-American. You're seeing that the average Utahn probably is against the Black Lives Matter movement, it shouldn't be for or against police, but there's certainly more on the side of protecting police than having sympathy for how African Americans are often treated in this country by police and by the judicial system. So can you just talk about, we're going to save your disaffection for part 4, but there's a point where you're a faithful Mormon Black woman, multiracial woman living in Utah, seeing the massive support for Republicanism and for Trump and for the MAGA stuff and against the Black Lives Matter movement while you're living here. And I'm just paint a picture of what that's like for you, not as you're becoming disaffected, but as you're a believing Mormon woman still in Utah.
Well, can I just
who
say
also happens
something
to be
really quick?
Black,
Because
if you
I'm
want.
noticing your reaction in just like going back or thinking about it. You don't have to. You don't have to do this. You don't have to go here. This is really because
it's not your job to educate us.
That's right.
Oh,
that's very effortful on your behalf. And you don't, I just want to say that you don't need to. You can pass on this question. We can move on with the timeline. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think you bring up a really good point. Like, one of the main reasons that I left the museum project, the Black History Museum, stepped away as the director, is because like the work itself was really traumatizing. Like, the number of times I had to talk to ignorant white people who denied that racism was even a thing or an issue, or people who would say like, well, slavery ended in whatever year that was. It's not a thing. Like, you're just making this up. Or like, I'd set up the museum exhibit. That's what was heartbreaking every time, to put out the information and the artifacts. A lot of the term for it is negrobilia, like little, any like kind of Black artifacts. Mammy dolls is an example. I kind of grew our collection of Mammy dolls, and we got a great donation of Black dolls from the old McCarty Doll Museum in Provo that closed a while back. But they donated their entire Black doll collection, which is huge. But like, there was one artifact in particular that was always so heartbreaking to set up, and I'd put it out with little Black baby dolls, but it's like a a little tin plate advertisement for like African licorice drops, and it's like a little African baby, a little black baby, and the crocodile alligator is going to eat the baby, and the baby's like the candy. And it's just this thing that people used to joke about, the little black babies being like alligator bait, you know? And that was like the name of the candy and like the advertisement, like little licorice drops, babies to be eaten by the alligators. But I mean, I was a little bit, my view, I have to say, is pretty skewed because like, I was constantly like the people who would invite the museum to their organization or their school, were people who were quote unquote on our side. Like the people who didn't want anything to do with Black history being taught at schools, or people who complain about critical race theory or whatever. Sorry, I shouldn't say or whatever. But those people wouldn't invite us. They were the people who were flipping us off when we were driving the bus by them, you know, or like we had a window broken, you know, like those people weren't inviting us. So I had the good fortune of like when I was sharing the museum at organizations or schools or at events, like pride festivals and stuff, like it's with people who like wanted us there, who wanted the education, who wanted to hear, like, or see and experience and learn and also hear my perspective, like you guys are right now. You're asking me like, what's your perspective? What's your experience? That's really generous. Thank you. Like for caring and like recognizing that like racism is real and that people of color have had horrible experiences and experienced generational trauma, and it's so real. Thank you for acknowledging that. Not everyone does. People don't buy in. They think it's an act or something. Like we're just like pretending to be oppressed. Like go tell that, I don't know, like I can't like dive into my family history too much, but you know, like my grandmother was a prostitute for a time to try to make ends meet. Like I don't know a lot of white Mormons who have that story about their grandparents, you know? They don't think that's real, or they just haven't seen it in their worlds.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Or even having a relative, having a dad who oftentimes, I mean, I would imagine inevitably having a hyper like sense around safety.
Yes. Oh,
Literally
yeah.
being like in a moment, could be in a situation where he could be hunted. He could be.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I don't think that's something that's very close to.
He was so paranoid. He like taught my husband how to like, when the enemy arrives and is at the door of your bedroom, this is the angle and the direction that you shoot. Like, just like, and then to have loaded guns just on hand everywhere. He was so paranoid, and I know that's related to what he experienced in his childhood, and also I think in the military. The military was huge. But yeah, and like growing up, we had locks on our windows. Like he'd bolt our windows so that we could only open it slightly in the summer for cool air. It couldn't open wide enough for a human body to fit through. So no one could come in and no one could come out. The house had to be very secure. Like 3 locks on the front door, 3 locks from the living room to the garage, 2 locks from the garage to the backyard, 1 or 2 locks on the back gate. I was constantly getting locked out of the house because there were so many locks. It frustrated me to no end. And like, I remember having, when I brought my kids to visit once, and one of them had to pee. had to go to the bathroom. And I'm like pounding on the front door, like, we have to get in. He has to use the bathroom. Like, please open the door. And I was kicking the door. I was like kicking it. And then I thought, now I'm thinking like, wait, don't kick the door. You might get shot.
Yeah.
Like, you got to be careful. There are a lot of live guns in there. So, I mean, he would keep a gun in his back pocket when kids were trick-or-treating. I hated that idea. Like, oh, can you imagine, like, your little kid going to the door and not knowing that, like, the guy at the door has a gun, like, right there? Ugh.
Well, I guess thank you for everything you've been willing to share. And I guess I do want to just follow up with one question in this line, incorporating Margie's invitation for you to just say, I don't really want to talk about that. You know, when you think about Donald Trump being elected, and this is not to be political, I'm trying to talk about race in a way that isn't really partisan.
It's so connected.
I know.
Ugh.
So I just want to say I have Republican or conservative listeners. I don't believe that all Republicans are racist or that the Republican Party necessarily stands for anti-Black Lives Matter or whatever. But I do want to ask this question, like, and only answer what you're comfortable if you're comfortable at all. I can't imagine, like, as I was watching Donald Trump get elected in 2016, as I was watching the George Floyd stuff, as I was watching my fellow Utah Mormon Republicans' reactions to George Floyd or the Black Lives Matter movement or Donald Trump's election and all that entailed regarding race, I was horrified personally. I can't imagine what it would be like to be a person of color living in Utah as a faithful Mormon member, seeing how much Utah Mormons and Arizona Mormons and Idaho Mormons embraced anti-Black Lives Matter stuff and embraced political philosophies that seemed to be associated with racism.
Yeah.
So I guess I just want to give you a chance to say, as a believing Black Mormon woman living in Utah, is there anything you feel comfortable sharing about what that was like to see that all around you in the culture you were a part of?
Well, it's what started. It was one of the kickers that started the loss of faith, like the loss of faith in these people that I trusted.
What did you see?
That I admired.
What did you, like, I just gave my attempt at trying to give a framework for what you might have been experiencing. How would you describe what you were experiencing with your fellow Republican Utah Mormons regarding race? What did you experience?
Having a yelling match with this very respected older white man in my ward at the time. He said something unaffectionate about Black Lives Matter, and we got into this conversation about him, and he was defending all his police friends, and he was saying that, you know, we don't know the circumstances in George Floyd's death. We don't know, like, you know, what kind of a character he was, or, you know, basically saying like George Floyd like deserved what he got, that kind of attitude, defending the actions of the police officer in that situation. And I was losing it. I don't like yell at people. I yell at my kids sometimes, but I don't like yell at people like ward members. You know, but we got in a shouting match in a parking lot, and it was so just, I mean, and other people would make, he's not the only one, but I just lost, like, I looked up to these people so much, and all of a sudden I like felt like I couldn't trust them. I suddenly, like, in this community where I used to feel so safe, it's where I would turn to feel safe and welcome and loved. I suddenly realized, like, there are a lot more, like, people with, whether or not they want to admit it, with, like, pretty racist beliefs and behaviors and views than I was ever aware of. I think it kind of, looking back on my BYU experience, like, I was just so naive, you know, you're like, did you feel exoticized? Like, I don't think I even knew that word when I was a student. Like, I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
So, you know, now I'm looking at things through a different lens. And then I was sharing with the museum exhibit, it's specifically Utah's Black history. So I was sharing a lot of history and information about racism in the state of Utah. So statements by Brigham Young on big posters. One of the most interesting things was the redlining map for the development of Salt Lake City, where the green and red areas outlined on the map where Black people weren't allowed to live. The white people could live here. Black people. That's what redlining is. You separate people according to race and money and.
And that happened around what time period?
I'm trying to remember the year, but probably early 1900s. I mean, the house that I live in right now was built in 1905. I remember the house we lived in Kansas City was built in 1927, and it was in the deed of that home that a Black person couldn't own that property. Just like in the actual document that's still used. I mean, people say like, oh, this stuff isn't like, it's not in our laws or system. It's not systematic. There we go. People say racism isn't systematic.
Yeah.
It's not part of the system. But it's like, okay, look at the deed to my house. How it says here on paper that a Black person can't own this property. Can we update the system? Like, not everything's like digital where you can just like Control F, find, replace. Like, who's going to take the time to go back and update these documents? Nobody. I mean, like with that bill that just passed, like recognizing or the legality of same-sex marriage, apparently like it also as a subtext is recognizing the legality of interracial marriage. So like that just happened this year, or was it this 2023 or 2022? Late 2022. Within the last year. I mean, because we've had the court cases that have led the way for same-sex marriage or interracial marriage, like the Loving case, which happened in my dad's lifetime, like my own father, you know, having an interracial marriage, that was pretty newfangled, not very common. So, you know, so you've had these court cases that allow for these things to become legal. But then it's like, oh, 2023, we finally get that federal bill that like makes it like establishes it like in a definitive kind of final way. And interracial marriage was like a part of that too. Like beyond the court cases, let's like put it in writing, you know, make it official. And like, I'm looking back at the families that I idolized in Colorado Springs, and I used to not be into politics, and I still find it so much about it to be very distasteful. But part of my walking away is the fact that like I'm sick of all of it, and I no longer want to be affiliated with any particular religious organization or political party. I want to have no obligations to these organizations that don't reflect my values.
Yeah.
I must separate myself from them.
Well, and that's a really good preview for what part 4 is going to be. And I don't know if we covered everything that you wanted to cover in part 3.
Yeah.
What I do want to say, just to close out this one section, just from my perspective, because I know I'm putting you in a really difficult position by even asking these questions, I'll just say it. The Mormon Church claims to be led by prophets of God who speak for and to Jesus and God. So for me, what that means is if there's any righteous or good or noble cause on the planet, specifically around the treatment of humans, but definitely around the matters of civil rights or the treatment of marginalized groups, which Jesus purported to be the champion of, that claim of our prophets being led by God would require that we would be on the forefront as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on all the really important social justice issues, racism being primary. And so I'm just going to say, without, I'm a registered Republican in Utah, and I've got my own reasons for that. I certainly have progressive sensibilities, but my point is saying, putting politics out of this, partisanship out of this, what I would hope from my church, my people, is that this church would lead the nation in fighting for the rights of minorities, fighting for the rights of Black people and of other people of color and indigenous people, and that we would be against police brutality, against systematic racism, for anti-racism. And I know critical race theory is highly politicized and charged, but for education about Black history, and for any sort of education that helps white people specifically understand systemic racism, how
and
it
white
is,
supremacy.
and white supremacy, and how it exists, and how it's still affecting us, and how it is deeply problematic. That's what I would expect from my people. And what I've experienced as a white guy who just tries to care about these things, that does care about these things, is deep disappointment that the average Mormon, the average Utah Mormon, the average Idaho Mormon, Arizona Mormon is like leading the charge on the complete other side of where we should be. And if the brethren, the church leaders do speak out, it's in a very careful, calculated, legalistic, neutral way, saying, well, we denounce all racism in all forms, but doing very little beyond that to acknowledge and or change the fact that our culture is flaming hot red Trump MAGA, sort of anti, I don't want to say super racist, but certainly anti doing anything to sort of acknowledge systemic racism and or address the epidemic of police brutality. That's what I am kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And I'm just, and I guess I was just wanting to know if you felt those things too.
I think that the racism in the church is also systematic. And when I say system, it's part of the doctrine. You would have to go change the doctrines. You would have to go change things that are in writing. Like I said, about going back and updating the deed of a house to say that anyone can own it. You'd have to go and you'd have to update the scriptures. And you're right. You would think that like with a modern prophet who has the ability to receive like modern revelation that, like why aren't we at the forefront? Why, when you have a person who could receive a modern revelation to make a change, why aren't those changes happening? Why is it in defense of the traditions, the tradition, like for traditional marriage, for example? Like I've said that this is one of the things that I feel like we're starting to inch into part 4, but it's like, wouldn't it be nice to be part of a church where like a woman could perform the marriage of my child to the partner of their choice? Wouldn't that be nice? This is not the church where you can find that.
Yeah.
So, and then you get to the Book of scriptures in the Book of Mormon. There's some pretty intense. Well, there's a lot of violence in the Book of Mormon, and there's a lot of division between racial groups in the Book of Mormon. That's like, I feel like the whole book is like those two themes. And so, I mean, when I read the Book of Mormon in high school, I literally thought that my skin would lighten if I became more righteous. Like I really believed what I was reading. I was like, is my skin a little bit lighter than my siblings because I'm becoming more righteous than them? I actually believed that. Like, and I mean, I'm alive. I'm right here. This is not something in the past, generations ago. Like, this is current. It's current. So like, it's in the doctrines. It's in the teachings.
Yeah.
It's in the system of the church. It's systematic.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being willing to discuss really hard things. And I'm sorry that you have to even be talking about any of this.
Thanks. I mean, thanks for valuing what I have to say. This is an amazing program that you have to bring in just people, anybody.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this stuff. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So part 4 of your story is going to be about your deconstruction, and it's going to be fantastic. So everyone, please stay tuned and plan to come back for part 4. Yes. Is there anything else you want to share to kind of conclude part 3 that's just really fits well in this part, or do you think we've kind of covered the main things you wanted to cover?
I was talking about my dad, and maybe we can leave with a little cliffhanger in that 2021 January, I got a call that a gun shot had gone off in my dad's home, and we weren't sure if he was okay. And I'm on the phone, and I got in my car, I threw some things in a bag, and just got in my car and started driving to Colorado. And we shall find out what happens next.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, Liz Lambson, thank you so much for everything you've shared. This is a really heavy, intense set of topics.
Yeah.
And your willingness to help us learn and do better is can't be probably overstated.
We so value your experience and your willingness to share it.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for listening.
All right. And don't go away. Come right back for part 4, where we're going to find out how, and we didn't even cover so much what it's like to be playing for the orchestra at Temple Square, touring with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
It's just like it's just priesthood and relief society on steroids. Okay. In little choir frocks.
Okay.
Little robes, choir robes.
All right. Well, what we'll be talking about is how someone who basically gave her whole life to the church, converted to the church, sacrificed for the church, and was fully on board, how that all comes kind of unraveling and crashing down just in the past year, right? Like
I resigned on December 4th, and within 24 hours, someone had forwarded my resignation letter to a man named John DeLynn. So within a day of me saying, I want nothing to do with Mormonism, came the opportunity to be on a show called Mormon Stories.
Yeah.
Lucky us.
So here I am.
And part 4, we'll talk about how that all unraveled. Your Mormon dream kind of unraveled.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Liz Lambson, for coming on. Thank you. Margie, thanks for being here and being co-host.
Absolutely.
And thanks to everyone who's joined us today for part 3. And please come right back for part 4, where we'll conclude our interview with Liz.
And there will be a great outfit.
And she'll have a brand new outfit with makeup. There's a makeup artist. There's a makeup artist
just
here.
You wait.
Just you wait. Please come back for the wardrobe change.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all for part 4 just right around the corner. Take care, everybody. See you soon.